That sickeningly sweet smile on my mother-in-law's face as she handed me eviction papers from my own home still haunts my nightmares. I should have seen it coming. The calculated moves, the secret meetings with my husband, the helpful financial advice. But this time Vivian wasn't just meddling, she was orchestrating my complete destruction. I'm Nora, and at 34, I never imagined I'd be 7 months pregnant and sobbing in a roadside motel while the house I helped pay for slipped through my fingers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. The way she'd casually mention which neighborhoods were appropriate for her son. How she'd squeeze my arm just a little too tight when pointing out features in houses she approved of. The careful way she'd ask about our budget, eyes narrowing when I'd mention my contribution from years of saving? Don't worry about the money, dear, she'd say to me while looking at her son Drew. Family takes care of family. Drew and I had been married for 3 years, and for 3 years, Vivian had been a constant shadow over our relationship. The weekly dinners at her sprawling colonial home. The unexpected visits to our apartment. The phone calls that always seemed to come right when Drew and I were in the middle of important conversations. She's just lonely since Dad died, Drew would explain, his voice tinged with that familiar guilt she wielded like a weapon. She means well. But meaning well doesn't explain why she kept an emergency key to our apartment even after we asked for it back. It doesn't explain why she rearranged our furniture while we were at work, or why she once threw away my grandmother's hand-knitted blanket because it was ratty and embarrassing. Still, I never expected this. I never thought she'd go this far. It started innocently enough. Drew got a promotion at the architecture firm, and we finally had enough for a down payment on a modest home. We'd been searching for months when Vivian mentioned her bridge partner Harriet was selling her daughter's house, a charming craftsman just 10 minutes from downtown Oak Ridge. Perfect location, great bones, and under market value, Vivian cooed. Harriet would be so pleased to keep it with a family she knows. The house was beautiful, hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, a bay window that caught the morning light. Perfectly. I could immediately envision our future there. A nursery painted soft yellow, summer barbecues in the backyard, a lifetime of memories waiting to be made. It needs work, I said, noting the outdated kitchen and the bathroom that clearly hadn't been touched since the 1980s. Cosmetic issues, Vivian dismissed with a wave of her manicured hand. Drew can handle those, can't you, sweetheart? He's always been so handy. Drew nodded, already measuring the living room windows with his eyes, the architect in him seeing not what was, but what could be. We should think about it, I said cautiously. Get an inspection, talk to a realtor. Oh, there's no time for all that, Vivian insisted. Harriet has other interested parties. You need to decide now. That should have been my second warning, the rush, the pressure, the convenient elimination of standard home buying procedures. But Drew was already sold, sketching renovation plans on a napkin as we stood in the future kitchen. This is it, Nora, he said, eyes bright with excitement. Our first home. I relented. The price was good, the location ideal. Despite my misgivings about Vivian's involvement, I wanted this fresh start for us. More importantly, I wanted it before the baby came. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Paperwork, bank appointments, and endless calls with Vivian, who insisted on being part of every step. She even recommended her personal lawyer, Bernard, to handle the closing. He's been handling my affairs for decades, she explained. I trust him implicitly. The day we signed the papers, Bernard laid out stacks of documents while Vivian hovered nearby, occasionally pointing out where we needed to initial. This is standard, she assured me when I began reading through one particularly dense document. Just legal jargon. I should have read every word. I should have hired my own lawyer. I should have trusted my instincts about Vivian from the very beginning. But I didn't. I signed where Bernard indicated, too excited about finally having our own place to question the process. Drew and I took our new keys and spent that evening in our empty living room, planning our future on the hardwood floor, my back against his chest, his hands cradling my growing belly. We moved in the following weekend. Drew's colleagues helped with the heavy furniture, and my sister Penny drove 3 hours with her pickup truck loaded with housewarming gifts. Vivian arrived last, carrying nothing but a small plant and a folder of paint swatches, more appropriate than whatever you've chosen. The first month was blissful despite Vivian's near-daily visits. Drew started renovating the kitchen, installing new cabinets and countertops on weekends. I set up the nursery, painting clouds on the ceiling while talking to our unborn daughter about all the adventures we'd have in our new home. Then came the leak. A slow drip from the upstairs bathroom that stained the living room ceiling. Drew climbed into the attic and discovered extensive water damage, not recent, but deliberately concealed before the sale. "This could cost thousands," he said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "The inspector should have caught this." "What inspector?" I asked, suddenly remembering we'd skipped that step at Vivian's insistence. Tensions rose as more problems emerged: faulty wiring behind the walls, a foundation crack in the basement, black mold in the attic insulation. Each discovery drained not only our savings, but Drew's enthusiasm for our home. "Maybe Mom was right," he muttered. "One night after discovering the pipes would need replacing, maybe we should have bought new construction instead of this money pit." I was 6 months pregnant when the real blow came. A certified letter arrived addressed to both of us. Inside was a notice of property tax delinquency, not for a few months, but for 3 years before we purchased the home. "This can't be right," Drew said, reaching for his phone. "I'll call Bernard." But Bernard wasn't taking our calls. Neither was Harriet. The only person who answered was Vivian, who arrived at our door within the hour, concern painted on her face like expensive makeup. "Oh dears," she sighed, settling into our couch as if it were her own. "I was afraid something like this might happen." "You knew?" Drew asked, still clutching the tax notice. "Not specifically," she hedged, "but Harriet's daughter had financial difficulties. That's why the price was so reasonable." "Reasonable?" I echoed. "We're on the hook for $17,000 in back taxes." "Well," Vivian said, straightening her silk scarf, "I might have a solution." "A solution?" Drew perked up immediately, his architect's mind already seeking the quickest path through this labyrinth of problems. "What kind of solution?" Vivian set her designer handbag on our coffee table, the one I'd refinished myself, and extracted a folder with the precision of a surgeon. Everything about her was calculated, from the sympathetic tilt of her head to the way she positioned herself between Drew and me on the sofa. "I could help with the tax burden," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured generosity. "As a loan, of course." "We can't accept that," I said quickly. "We'll figure something out ourselves." Vivian's smile tightened at the edges. "Dear, in your condition, stress isn't good for the baby. Think about your daughter." The baby card. Classic Vivian manipulation, wrapping control in the guise of concern. "What would be the terms?" Drew asked, ignoring my warning glance. She slid the folder toward him. "Nothing too formal between family. I invest in the property, you make improvements, and we all benefit. The neighborhood is up and coming, after all." "Invest how exactly?" I pressed. "I'd cover the back taxes and necessary repairs. In exchange, I'd hold a partial stake in the property, just on paper, of course, for tax purposes." "What percentage?" My question hung in the air like the dust motes floating through the late afternoon sunlight. 49%. Vivian's eyes never left Drew's face. Hardly even half. The room seemed to tilt beneath me. That's almost our entire investment. We've already put all our savings into the down payment and initial repairs. Vivian sighed, heavily, as if explaining simple arithmetic to a particularly slow child. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Nora, the house needs at least $50,000 in repairs. That's on top of the $17,000 in back taxes. Where will that money come from? Your part-time graphic design work? The savings you've already depleted? Drew shifted uncomfortably. She's not wrong about the numbers, Nora. We could get a home equity loan, I suggested. Or I could pick up more freelance projects. While preparing for a newborn? Vivian arched a perfectly penciled eyebrow. Be realistic. We should discuss this privately, I told Drew, fighting to keep my voice steady. There's no time for lengthy deliberations, Vivian interjected. The county could place a lien on the property any day. You could lose everything you've invested. The word lien visibly rattled Drew. His father had lost a business property to exactly such a situation years ago, a story Vivian had recounted numerous times over the years. We'll think about it, I said firmly, standing despite my awkward balance. Thank you for the offer, Vivian, but we need to consider all options. Of course, she conceded with practiced grace, gathering her things. At the door, she paused to hug Drew. Sleep on it, darling, but don't wait too long. These situations have a way of spiraling quickly. After she left, the argument erupted like a long dormant volcano. We can't give your mother half our house. I paced the living room, one hand supporting my lower back. It's 49%, not half, Drew corrected, missing the point entirely. And it's just on paper. Nothing with your mother is ever just anything. She'll use this to control every decision we make about our home, our lives. Drew's face hardened in that familiar way it always did, when criticism of his mother entered our conversations. She's trying to help us. She's trying to own us, I countered. Why did she recommend a house with so many hidden problems? Why did she rush us through the purchase? Why did she insist on using her lawyer instead of one we chose? You're being paranoid, Drew dismissed, a phrase I'd heard increasingly since becoming pregnant. The hormones are making you irrational. I stopped pacing. Don't you dare blame this on hormones. Your mother has been systematically inserting herself into our marriage from day one, and now she wants to legally bind herself to our home. Our home that we might lose without her help, he shot back. What's your brilliant solution, Nora? Where are we going to find $67,000? I had no immediate answer. My freelance income had already dwindled as clients learned I was pregnant, making assumptions about my availability and commitment. Our savings were depleted, and our credit was stretched thin from the initial purchase. We'll find another way, was all I could offer. That night, Drew slept on the couch, and I lay awake in our bedroom staring at the water stain on the ceiling, the first domino in this cascade of disasters. The next morning, I called 5 banks about home equity loans. All rejected us due to the unresolved tax situation. 3 contractors came to assess the most urgent repairs, each quoting figures that made my stomach clench. By evening, when Drew returned from work, I was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by rejection, letters, and repair estimates. Mom called, he announced without preamble. She's drafted the agreement. Bernard just needs our signatures. You told her yes without discussing it with me? My voice sounded distant, even to my own ears. Drew pulled out a chair, its legs scraping harshly against the hardwood. What choice do we have, Nora? Really? What choice? Later that week, we sat in Bernard's office, the same place where we'd signed our purchase documents months earlier. This time, I read every line of the agreement, despite Vivian's impatient sighs and Bernard's condescending explanations. As you can see, Bernard pointed to a paragraph buried on page 7. Mrs. Hayes will cover the tax liability and provide funding for necessary repairs up to $75,000. In exchange, she acquires a 49% ownership interest in the property. And this clause, I asked, indicating a section near the end, about occupancy determinations? Bernard adjusted his glasses. Standard language. Since Mrs. Hayes will be a significant stakeholder, she naturally has some say in decisions about the property. What kind of decisions? I pressed. Oh, major renovations, rental considerations, that sort of thing. He waved dismissively. Nothing that would affect your day-to-day living. Drew squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea to stop making waves. His mother sat across from us, her expression placid but her eyes calculating. I signed the papers, not because I believed Bernard's explanation or trusted Vivian's intentions, but because our daughter kicked vigorously against my ribs at that exact moment, reminding me that some battles had to be postponed for more important ones. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was how quickly Vivian would exploit her newfound power. It started with helpful suggestions about the repairs. The contractors we'd selected weren't up to her standards. The materials we'd chosen were cheap and tacky. The color schemes we'd planned would hurt resale value. Since she controlled the repair funds, her suggestions weren't really suggestions at all. It's just paint, Drew would say whenever I objected. It's just fixtures. It's just flooring. Why fight over details? But it wasn't just about aesthetic details. It was about control, about slowly erasing my presence from every corner of our home. Then came the weekly investment meetings, where Vivian would review expenditures and progress. These quickly evolved into critical assessments of my housekeeping, my pregnancy diet, my birth plan. I'm just concerned, she'd tell Drew later. Nora seems so overwhelmed. By my 8th month of pregnancy, Vivian had a key to our house, for emergencies, and used it liberally. I'd come home from doctor's appointments to find my carefully organized baby clothes rearranged, my birth books replaced with parenting, guides Vivian approved of, my home office increasingly cluttered with her belongings as she temporarily stored things in what she called the extra room. Our home no longer felt like ours. It had become an extension of Vivian's domain, with Drew and me merely occupants on increasingly shaky ground. The breaking point came 3 weeks before my due date. I waddled into our kitchen, now redone, in Vivian's preferred cream and sage color scheme instead of the bright yellows and blues I'd chosen, to find my mother-in-law and a woman I'd never seen before measuring the adjacent spare room. This would make a lovely sitting area, the stranger commented, making notes on a small pad. The morning light is perfect for reading. Exactly what I thought, Vivian agreed, not even acknowledging my presence in the doorway. We'll need to remove that cluttered desk, of course. That cluttered desk is my workspace, I said, one hand instinctively protective over my belly. Who is this person, and why are you planning changes to our home? Vivian turned with exaggerated surprise. Nora! I thought you had that birthing class today. It was canceled. Who is this? I repeated. This is Patrice, my interior designer. Vivian's tone suggested this was a perfectly normal situation. Since we're making so many improvements to the property, I thought we'd get professional input. For what purpose exactly? I asked, though I already knew. The dread that had been building for months crystallized into certainty. The guest, sweet, of course. Vivian smiled that honeyed smile that never reached her eyes. Since I'll be here to help with the baby for those first crucial months. No. The word fell from my lips like a stone. Absolutely not. Patrice glanced between us, clearly sensing the tension. Perhaps I should come back another time. Nonsense, Vivian dismissed. Nora's just hormonal. Expectant mothers get so territorial, don't they? My son will see the practicality of the arrangement. I stepped fully into the room, blocking their access to my office space. My husband and I have already discussed postpartum arrangements. We agreed we need time to bond as a new family. This was true, though Drew's commitment to that agreement had weakened with each passing week of Vivian's influence. "Plans change," Vivian said simply. "Drew called me this morning after your doctor mentioned the possibility of a C-section. You'll need significant help, and who better than family?" My doctor had mentioned no such thing. The pregnancy had been textbook perfect. Ironically, the only smooth aspect of our lives lately. The lie was so blatant I almost laughed. "My doctor said nothing about a C-section yesterday," I countered. "And even if she had, that would be a private medical matter between me, my husband, and my healthcare providers." Vivian's expression hardened momentarily before she recovered her practiced smile. Drew must have misunderstood something then. Regardless, Patrice and I are just exploring options. As a 49% stakeholder in this property, I have every right to discuss potential improvements. "Improvements to our home, not your personal suite," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. "The agreement clearly states I have input on all structural and design modifications," Vivian replied, her tone cooling. "Section 12, paragraph 4, if you've forgotten." Of course she had memorized the exact clause. I hadn't forgotten it. I'd spent nights poring over that contract, searching for loopholes, any escape from the web she'd spun around us. "Patrice," I addressed the designer directly. "I apologize, but this isn't a good time. We're not making any decisions about this space today." The woman nodded, clearly uncomfortable. "I'll touch base later, Vivian." She gathered her materials quickly and excused herself, leaving me alone with my mother-in-law. As soon as the front door closed, Vivian's facade dropped. "You're being unreasonable." Drew and I discussed this extensively. "Behind my back," I said flatly. Again. "Because you overreact to everything." She gestured dismissively toward my belly. "This pregnancy has turned you paranoid and controlling. Drew is worried about your mental state." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Drew and I had drifted apart over the past few months. But had he really been discussing my mental state with his mother? "Get out," I whispered, then louder. "Get out of my house, Vivian." "I believe you mean our house," she corrected, retrieving her designer handbag from the counter. "I'll speak with Drew tonight. He'll help you understand this arrangement is for the best." After she left, I sank onto the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinet she'd selected, and sobbed until I could barely breathe. When I finally managed to pull myself together, I called my sister Penny, the only person who truly understood the situation. "Move in with me," Penny offered immediately after I recounted the incident. "Today. Right now." "I can't just leave," I protested weakly. "This is my home too. And what about Drew?" "What about him?" Penny's voice hardened. "He's chosen his side repeatedly, Nora. He's allowing his mother to take over your life at the exact moment you need him most." "It's complicated," I said, the phrase I'd been using to excuse Drew's behavior for months. "The house, the money situation—" "It's not complicated," Penny interrupted. "It's crystal clear. Vivian is using this house to control both of you, and Drew is letting her. The question is, are you going to let her too?" I didn't have an answer. That evening, I confronted Drew as soon as he arrived home. "Your mother is planning to move in," I said without preamble. "She brought an interior designer to convert my office." Drew set down his briefcase with deliberate care. "She mentioned, you were upset about this." "Upset? I'm furious. How could you discuss this with her but not with me?" "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this," he sighed, loosening his tie. "Mom is trying to help, Nora. After the baby comes, we'll need support." "We need boundaries," I countered. "Your mother already controls our renovations, our finances, and increasingly, Our marriage. Now she wants to live here? Temporarily, Drew clarified, as if that made it better. Just until you're back on your feet. And who decides when? That is, your mother. You? When does our life become our own again, Drew? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen increasingly often. You're being dramatic. It's a practical solution to a temporary problem. The problem isn't temporary, I insisted. It's Vivian's constant interference in our lives. She saved our house. Drew's voice rose for the first time. Without her, we'd be bankrupt and homeless. A little gratitude wouldn't hurt. Gratitude? I echoed in disbelief. She manipulated this entire situation from the beginning. She steered us toward a house with hidden problems, rushed us through the process without proper inspections, and then swooped in to save us by taking half. Ownership. Does none of that seem suspicious to you? Now you're being paranoid, Drew dismissed. Why would my mother deliberately create problems just to solve them? To maintain control, I said, the pieces falling into place as I spoke. To ensure you remain dependent on her, just like you've been since your father died. And now she's extending that control to me, to our baby, to every aspect of our lives. Drew's expression hardened. I'm not having this conversation again. Mom is helping, period. If you can't appreciate that, maybe you need to reevaluate your priorities. My priority is our family, you, me, and our daughter, not Vivian. She is family, Drew insisted. Not in our marriage she isn't, I countered. At least she shouldn't be. We went to bed angry, backs turned to each other in the darkness. The next morning, Drew left for work without saying goodbye. Another first in our relationship. By mid-afternoon, Vivian was back, this time with a contractor. I watched from the nursery window as they toured the backyard, gesturing toward spaces where, I assumed, more of Vivian's improvements would soon manifest. I called Penny again. I need some time to think, I told her. Can I stay with you for a few days? Pack your bags, she replied without hesitation. I'll be there in an hour. I packed methodically. Clothes, toiletries, the few mementos that were exclusively mine. Looking around our bedroom, I realized how few things truly reflected me anymore. The comforter was Vivian's choice. Higher thread count, dear. The curtains, too. Proper light control for proper sleep. Even the arrangement of furniture. Feng. Shui is essential for harmony. Penny arrived as promised, her ancient pickup truck rumbling in our driveway. Vivian, still in the backyard with the contractor, straightened immediately at the sound. Going somewhere? She asked, striding toward us as Penny helped load my suitcases. I'm staying with Penny for a few days, I said, not meeting her gaze. Does Drew know about this? Her tone implied I needed his permission. I'll call him. Later. Vivian's expression shifted to concern so artificial it nearly made me laugh. Nora, in your condition, you shouldn't be making impulsive decisions. The stress isn't good for the baby. What's not good for the baby, Penny interjected, is watching her mother be systematically erased from her own home. Vivian stiffened. This is a family matter. She is family, I said, echoing Drew's words from the night before, but with very different meaning. As we drove away, I watched Vivian in the side mirror, phone already at her ear. Calling Drew, no doubt, to spin this latest development into further evidence of my instability. Penny's apartment was small but welcoming. A graphic designer like me, she'd created a space that burst with color and personality, everything our house had gradually lost under Vivian's influence. Stay as long as you need, she said, helping me settle onto her pull-out couch. This might not be a luxury craftsman, but at least it's Vivian-free. Drew called that evening, his voice tight with controlled anger. What are you doing, Nora? Mom said you packed suitcases and left with Penny. I need some space to think, I explained. This situation with your mother is untenable. So you just leave? Without discussing it with me? The irony wasn't lost on me. Like you discussed your mother moving in with us? Silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we'd left unsaid over the months. Come home, he finally said, his voice softening. We can work this out. How? You've chosen your mother's side in every disagreement we've had. Nothing. I say seems to matter anymore. That's not true, he protested. I'm trying to balance everyone's needs. Except mine don't seem to factor into the equation, I pointed out. I need our home to be ours, Drew, not your mother's newest renovation project. She's invested a lot of money. It's not about the money, I interrupted. It's about boundaries, respect, and partnership. I'm supposed to be your partner, but lately, it feels like I'm just an inconvenience in your relationship with Vivian. More silence. Then, when are you coming back? I don't know, I admitted. I need to figure some things out. The nursery is ready, he offered, as if this might sway me. Mom hired someone to finish the clouds you were painting on the ceiling. The statement, intended as an enticement, only reinforced my decision to leave. Even my unfinished project for our daughter couldn't remain mine. I'll call you tomorrow, I said instead of screaming all the things I wanted to say. Days at Penny's turned into a week. Drew called daily, his tone vacillating between concern, frustration, and bargaining. Vivian sent texts that thinly veiled threats as worries. Drew is beside himself with worry. This kind of stress could affect his work performance. The doctor says the baby could come early with stress. You're putting both of you at risk. Bernard mentioned that abandonment could affect certain legal standings regarding the property. That last one caught my attention. I forwarded it to my friend Renee, who happened to be a real estate attorney. Her response was immediate. Call me now. Over coffee at her office the next day, Renee reviewed a copy of our agreement with Vivian that I'd brought along. This is... She trailed off, flipping through the pages with increasing concern. Nora, this is predatory. No, it's not great, but... No, you don't understand, Renee interrupted. This clause here about occupancy determinations? It essentially gives Vivian the right to determine who lives in the house. What? That's not what Bernard said it meant. Bernard works for Vivian, not you, Renee reminded me gently. This agreement is structured to gradually shift control of the property to her, not just ownership percentages. My hands trembled as I accepted the document back. So legally, could she? Evict you? Potentially, yes. Especially with this clause about harmonious household maintenance. It's deliberately vague, which gives her leverage. I felt sick. What about Drew? The agreement lists both of you as owners of the remaining 51%, but there's language here about primary decision-makers that seems to privilege Drew's position in case of disagreement between co-owners. She's planned for everything, I whispered, the full weight of Vivian's manipulation finally clear. Almost everything, Renee corrected. Have you checked the original deed? The one from when you purchased the house? I shook my head. Everything went through Bernard. Get a copy, Renee advised. There might be something there that could help. When I returned to Penny's apartment, there was a voicemail from Drew. Mom's lawyer sent some papers for you to sign. His voice sounded strained. Something about formalizing the living arrangements. Call me back. Instead, I called the county records office. The original deed would be public record, and I needed to see exactly what Bernard had filed months ago when we thought we were simply buying our first home. What I didn't expect was the phone call that came at 11 p.m. that night, jolting me from restless sleep on Penny's couch. Nora? Drew's voice was panicked. Where are you? At Penny's. You know that, I said, instantly alert. What's wrong? Mom came over with Bernard and some papers. She said since you've abandoned the property, we need to formalize the new arrangement. They had some document about transferring ownership percentages. My heart raced. Please tell me you didn't sign anything. I almost did, he admitted. But then Bernard mentioned something about your voluntary surrender of residence rights, and it felt wrong. I told them I needed to read everything first, and Mom got angry. Really angry. I've never seen her like that. What happened? I pressed, fully awake now. She said I was being ridiculous, that this was a simple formality given your unstable condition. I could hear the confusion in his voice. She talked about me like I wasn't even there, telling Bernard to explain it in simpler terms, so I'd understand what was best for me. That's how she talks to me all the time, I said quietly. I know. His voice broke. I see it now. I'm so sorry, Nora. I didn't want to believe. She's my mother. Drew. I asked them to leave, he continued. Bernard tried to insist, but I told them I'd call my own lawyer in the morning. Mom said. He hesitated. Mom said I was throwing away everything she'd done for me, just like your bad influence would ruin my life. The silence between us felt different this time, not hostile, but shared, as if we were finally seeing the same truth. Can we talk? He asked finally. In person? There's something I need to show you about the house. Something I found while looking for the original paperwork. What kind of something? I'm not sure, he admitted. But I think it's important. And Nora? I think you were right. About everything. Penny insisted on driving me to meet Drew the next morning. I don't trust this sudden change of heart, she said, keys already in hand. What if Vivian put him up to this to lure you back? The thought had crossed my mind too. After months of Drew siding with his mother, his midnight epiphany seemed almost too convenient. But the pain in his voice had sounded genuine, and something about the way he'd described Vivian's reaction resonated with my own experiences. I need to at least hear what he found, I said, easing my 8 months pregnant body into Penny's pickup, but I promise I won't stay if anything feels off. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our house and Penny's apartment, neutral territory. Drew was already there when we arrived, occupying a corner table with 3 cups waiting. Decaf. For you, he said, sliding a mug toward me as I lowered myself into a chair. And black coffee for Penny, I remembered. My sister nodded curtly, making no move to sit. I'll be at that table by the window, she told me. Within eyesight, within earshot. Give me a signal if you need me. Drew watched her go with a sad smile. She's a good sister. The best, I agreed. She's been my rock through all this. An awkward silence descended, filled with everything we'd left unsaid over the past months. Drew looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, his usually meticulous clothes wrinkled. For the first time in a long while, I saw my husband without Vivian's shadow over him. You said you found something, I prompted finally. He nodded, reaching into a manila folder he'd brought. Before I show you this, I need to say something. His voice wavered. I've been blind, Nora. Worse than blind. I've been complicit. Everything you said about Mom's controlling behavior, her manipulation, her interference, you were right, and I refused to see it. What changed? I asked, my hand instinctively moving to my belly as our daughter kicked vigorously. Last night, he said, watching her talk to Bernard about me like I was a child incapable of making decisions. It was like seeing her clearly for the first time. And then I realized, this is how she's been treating you all along, and I let it happen. I enabled it. Tears welled in his eyes. I kept telling myself she was helping us, saving our home, looking out for our future. But it was never about helping. It was about control. And I gave it to her. Part of me wanted to comfort him, but a stronger part remained cautious. This revelation comes very late, Drew. After months of choosing her side, of dismissing my concerns as hormonal overreactions. I know, he acknowledged, wiping his eyes roughly. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. Maybe not ever. But I need to show you what I found when I was looking through our closing paperwork last night. He slid a document across the table, a copy of our original deed from the day we purchased the house. Look at the ownership section. I scanned. The legal language, not immediately seeing what had prompted his urgent call. It lists both our names as joint tenants. That's what we expected. Keep reading, he urged. The inheritance clause. My eyes fell on a paragraph near the bottom of the page, one I'd glossed over during the chaotic closing day months earlier. In the event of sale or transfer of partial ownership, the remaining original joint tenants shall maintain right of first refusal for any subsequent transfers. Should transfer occur without satisfying this condition, all partial ownership interests revert to the original joint tenants as recorded in this deed. I looked up, confusion. Giving way to realization. It means, Drew said, leaning forward, that legally, Mom should have offered us the chance to buy back the shares before transferring any ownership to herself. The 49% she owns isn't valid because that right of first refusal was never honored. My mind raced through the implications. But we couldn't have afforded to buy anything back. That was the whole point of her solution. We needed her money. True, Drew conceded. But the clause doesn't say we had to exercise the right, only that it had to be offered. Bernard never mentioned this, and I'm certain it wasn't in any of the documents we signed with Mom. Because Bernard works for Vivian, I echoed Renee's words. He deliberately concealed this clause from us. Drew nodded grimly. I called a colleague this morning, Paul Fisher from the firm's legal department. He confirmed that if this clause wasn't explicitly waived in our agreement with Mom, her ownership stake could be legally challenged. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. So, what does this mean for us, practically speaking? It means we have leverage, Drew said. It means we can fight back. Your mother won't give up easily, I warned. You saw how she reacted last night just to you delaying a signature. Imagine her response to being told her ownership claim isn't valid. Drew's expression hardened with a determination I hadn't seen in a long time. I know. That's why I've spent the morning making calls. Paul referred me to a property rights attorney who can represent us. I've moved our savings to a new account Mom can't access, and I've changed the locks on the house. I stared at him, simultaneously impressed and wary. You changed the locks? After what happened last night, I realized she might try to take more drastic steps. The contractor she hired mentioned she'd been discussing renovations that would start once the ownership transition was complete. I don't know what she was planning, but I'm not taking chances. Penny approached, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Everything okay over here? I handed her the deed with the crucial clause highlighted. As she read, her eyebrows rose steadily. Well, 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 she murmured. Vivian's legal chess game just got a lot more interesting. The question now, Drew said, addressing both of us, is what we do with this information. The attorney I spoke with laid out several options. Such as, I prompted. We could file for an injunction immediately, challenging her ownership based on this clause. It would likely lead to a court battle, but Paul thinks we'd have a strong case. Or, Penny pressed, clearly sensing there were alternatives. Or, Drew continued, we use this as leverage in negotiations. Offer her a clean exit. She gets her money back, we get full ownership, and she stays out of our lives going forward. I considered both approaches, weighing the potential outcomes. Vivian wasn't someone who surrendered easily, regardless of legal standing. A court battle would be expensive, stressful, and potentially drag on for months. well past our daughters. Earth. There's a third option, I said slowly, an idea forming as I spoke. One that gives us the satisfaction of confrontation while avoiding a lengthy legal process. Drew and Penny leaned forward, intrigued. We call a meeting, I explained, with Vivian, Bernard, and us, plus our new attorney. We present the clause, demonstrate how their agreement violated it, and then offer our terms. Which would be? Drew asked. She surrenders all ownership claims immediately. In exchange, we'll repay her investment over time, with interest, but as a proper loan, with fixed terms, not an ownership stake. She'll never agree to that, Penny scoffed. She wants control, not just money. Exactly, I smiled grimly. When she refuses, we reveal that we've already filed the paperwork challenging her ownership. She can either accept our reasonable repayment plan or risk losing everything in court, including the money she's already invested. Drew's eyes widened. A bluff? Not entirely, I clarified. We'll have the paperwork prepared and ready to file. She just doesn't need to know we haven't submitted it yet. Devious, Penny grinned approvingly. I like it. Drew looked less certain. You don't know my mother like I do. She'll see this as a declaration of war. It is a declaration of war, I said firmly. One she started the moment she decided to use our home as a weapon against us. The difference is, we now have ammunition of our own. As our daughter kicked against my ribs, I placed both hands on my swollen belly, my resolve strengthening. This isn't just about us anymore, Drew. It's about creating a safe, stable home for our child, one free from Vivian's manipulations. Drew covered my hands with his, the first physical contact between us in weeks. You're right. We need to end this cycle now before our daughter is born. So we're decided? I asked, looking between my husband and my sister. We confront Vivian with what we know? Penny nodded firmly. I'm behind you 100%. Drew took a deep breath, then squeezed my hands. Let's reclaim our home. As we left the coffee shop, a text message from Vivian lit up Drew's phone. Bernard has finalized the residence agreement. We'll need Nora's signature by tomorrow to proceed with the planned improvements. I've scheduled contractors for next week. Drew showed me the message, his jaw tight with anger I'd never seen directed at his mother before. Perfect timing, he said. Let's schedule our meeting for tomorrow. At the house, I added. Our house. Back at Penny's apartment, we spent the afternoon preparing. Drew called the attorney, explaining our strategy and requesting his presence at tomorrow's meeting. I created a detailed timeline of Vivian's involvement in our home purchase, highlighting each suspicious coincidence and manipulation. What if she brings reinforcements? Penny asked as evening fell. More lawyers or witnesses to paint you as the unstable pregnant woman abandoning her home. Then we adapt, I said with more confidence than I felt. The facts and the law are on our side. Besides, Vivian relies on privacy for her manipulations. She won't want an audience for this. Confrontation. Drew nodded in agreement. She cultivates this image of the perfect, supportive mother-in-law. The last thing she'll want is witnesses to the ugliness beneath that facade. That night, for the first time in weeks, Drew stayed at Penny's apartment, sleeping on a camping mattress beside the pull-out couch where I lay. As we switched off the lights, he whispered into the darkness. I'm sorry, Nora, for everything, for not seeing what was happening, for not protecting you and our daughter, for choosing wrong, again and again. I didn't immediately respond, the hurt of the past months still raw. I understand if you can't forgive me yet, he continued softly. But I need you to know. I'm choosing us now. You, me, and our daughter. And I'll keep choosing us, every day, no matter what happens tomorrow. I reached out in the darkness, finding his hand. One step at a time, I said finally. Tomorrow, we face Vivian, After that, we'll see. Sleep came fitfully, my mind racing with potential scenarios for the confrontation ahead. Would Vivian crumble when confronted with the truth, or would she fight even harder? Would Drew's newfound resolve hold in the face of his mother's inevitable emotional manipulations? Morning brought a flurry of activity. The attorney, Wilson Delgado, arrived at Penny's apartment for a final briefing before the meeting. Precise and confident, he reviewed our strategy and the relevant documents. "This inheritance clause is quite clear," he confirmed, examining the deed. "Your mother-in-law's claim to ownership is legally vulnerable. I've prepared both the negotiation terms and the court filing, should we need it." At 10 a.m., we pulled into the driveway of our Craftsman home. Vivian's luxury sedan was already parked out front, along with Bernard's town car. "Ready?" Drew asked, helping me out of Penny's truck. I placed a hand on my belly, feeling our daughter's reassuring movements. "Ready." As we approached the front door, our front door, I felt a surge of determination unlike anything I'd experienced before. This wasn't just about reclaiming physical space. It was about establishing boundaries that would protect our family for years to come. It was about teaching our daughter, even before her birth, that some things are worth fighting for. Drew unlocked the door with the new key, and we stepped over the threshold together, united in purpose for the first time in months. Ahead lay uncertainty, confrontation, and quite possibly the fight of our lives. But we were ready, because some battles aren't just about winning. They're about deciding what kind of life you want to create, what kind of parent you want to be, what legacy you want to leave. And as we entered the living room where Vivian waited, perfectly poised in an armchair like a queen on her throne, I knew with absolute certainty this was the moment that would define our future. "Nora, darling." Vivian's voice dripped with artificial sweetness as we entered the living room. "How wonderful of you to finally join us. We've been so concerned." She sat in what had once been my favorite reading chair, now reupholstered in a fabric of her choosing. Bernard occupied the adjacent sofa, papers spread across our coffee table. The scene embodied everything wrong with our situation. They had made themselves at home in our absence, rearranging our lives without our consent. "I'm sure you were," I replied, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. Drew's hand rested supportively at the small of my back as Wilson Delgado stepped forward, extending his business card to both Vivian and Bernard. "Wilson Delgado, property, rights attorney," he introduced himself smoothly. "I'll be representing Mr. and Mrs. Hayes in this matter." Bernard's eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in his professional veneer. "I wasn't aware legal representation was necessary for a simple family agreement. That characterization is precisely what we're here to discuss," Wilson replied, setting his briefcase on the edge of the coffee table. "Though I wouldn't describe a legally flawed property transfer as simple." Vivian's perfect smile faltered momentarily. "Drew, what is the meaning of this? We discussed everything last night." "No, Mom," Drew said firmly. "You discussed. I listened. And then I did some research of my own." I lowered myself carefully onto the remaining armchair, positioning myself directly across from Vivian. "We've reviewed the original property deed," I explained, "and discovered something interesting that Bernard apparently overlooked during the transfer of ownership." Bernard's expression tightened. All paperwork was properly filed according to state regulations. "The paperwork?" "Perhaps," Wilson interjected, "but not the conditions stipulated in the original deed." He withdrew a copy of the document, highlighting the inheritance clause with a yellow marker before sliding it across the coffee table. This right of first refusal was never honored. Vivian barely glanced at the document. "I'm sure whatever minor technical oversight you've discovered can be easily remedied." "Bernard?" Bernard reached for the deed, his practiced nonchalance betrayed by a slight tremor in his hand. As he read the highlighted clause, his expression darkened. "This is he began, then cleared his throat. This particular clause isn't relevant to our situation. The transfer wasn't a sale, but an investment partnership. An investment partnership that transferred 49% ownership, Wilson corrected, which absolutely triggers the right of first refusal condition. The language is unambiguous. Drew leaned forward. You deliberately concealed this clause from us, Bernard. The question is whether you did so at my mother's instruction or of your own initiative. I resent the implication, Bernard bristled. My professional ethics are clearly flexible, I interrupted. Just like the standard language you claimed was in our agreement about occupancy determinations. Vivian's composure cracked. Further, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the armrests. Drew, I don't appreciate this ambush. If there were concerns about the agreement, the appropriate approach would have been a private conversation. Like the private conversation you had with Bernard about transferring my ownership while I was staying at Penny's, I challenged, or the private renovations you planned without our consent. Everything I've done has been for this family's benefit, Vivian insisted, her voice rising slightly. I saved this house when you couldn't afford it. I've improved it when you lacked the vision. I've sacrificed and invested and planned, and this is the thanks I receive? Drew shook his head slowly. No, Mom. Everything you've done has been about control. About inserting yourself into our marriage, our home, our decisions. About making me, dependent on you. That's absurd, Vivian scoffed, though her eyes darted nervously to Bernard. Tell them, Bernard. Explain the legal standing of our agreement. Bernard shifted uncomfortably. While there may be a technical oversight regarding the right of first refusal, the agreement itself was properly executed by all parties. It would be challenging to invalidate at this stage. Actually, Wilson countered, producing another document from his briefcase, I've prepared a court filing that argues precisely the opposite. The failure to honor the right of first refusal invalidates the entire transfer of ownership. Vivian's face paled as Wilson continued. Furthermore, given the circumstances surrounding the original purchase, the rushed process without proper inspections, the hidden tax delinquency, the relationship between Mrs. Hayes Sr. and the seller, there's a compelling case for fraudulent misrepresentation. That's preposterous, Bernard sputtered. You have no evidence of any misrepresentation. I exchanged glances with Drew before addressing Vivian directly. We spoke with Harriet's daughter yesterday evening. Interesting conversation. She mentioned she'd never actually met you, despite your claims of being bridge partners with her mother. This was a calculated bluff. We'd attempted to contact Harriet's daughter without success, but Vivian's reaction confirmed our suspicions. Her composure shattered completely, color draining from her face. You've never been to a bridge club in your life, have you, Mom? Drew asked quietly. These accusations are outrageous, Bernard interjected, gathering his papers hastily. If you intend to pursue this matter in court, all communication should go through proper legal channels. We'd prefer to avoid court entirely, Wilson said smoothly, sliding a final document across the table. We've prepared an alternative arrangement. That's quite generous under the circumstances. The document outlined our terms. Vivian would relinquish all ownership claims immediately, and in exchange we would repay her investment in full, with 3% interest through monthly payments over 10 years. This is insulting, Vivian hissed, pushing the document away without reading it. After everything I've done, you expect me to simply walk away? To surrender my rightful ownership? Your ownership isn't rightful, Drew stated firmly. It was obtained through manipulation and legal oversight. These terms represent our good faith effort to resolve this fairly. And if I refuse? Vivian challenged. Wilson tapped the court filing. Then this gets submitted today. The property claim goes into dispute, which freezes any further renovations or changes. Given the evidence we've compiled, Litigation could extend for years, during which time your investment remains tied up with no return. Bernard leaned toward Vivian, whispering urgently. She brushed him off, her eyes locked on Drew. "You would do this to your own mother?" she asked, her voice trembling with carefully calibrated emotion. "After everything I sacrificed for you? After raising you alone when your father died?" I watched Drew's face, sensing the familiar pull of guilt Vivian had weaponized for years, but something had changed in him. A new resolve hardened his features. "This isn't about the past, Mom. It's about the future. My future with Nora and our daughter. A future where we make our own choices, in our own home, without your interference." Vivian's gaze shifted to me, cold and calculating. "This is your doing. You've turned my son against me." "No," I replied calmly. "You did that yourself when you decided ownership was more important than relationship, when control became more valuable to you than connection." For a fleeting moment, something like uncertainty flickered in Vivian's eyes, perhaps the first recognition that her carefully constructed plan was crumbling. Then her expression hardened into resolution. "Bernard!" she snapped, rising from the chair. "We're leaving! Prepare a response to these ridiculous claims." As they gathered their things, Wilson cleared his throat. "You have 48 hours to accept these terms before we file with the court. I suggest you review them carefully with your attorney, preferably one without a personal stake in the outcome." Bernard bristled but said nothing as he escorted Vivian toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back, her gaze boring into Drew. "You'll regret this decision," she said, voice low and dangerous. "When everything falls apart, don't come crying to me." The door closed behind them with surprising softness. Not the dramatic slam I'd expected, but a quiet click that somehow felt more ominous. In the silence that followed, Drew slumped onto the sofa, exhaustion etched across his face. That went about as well as could be expected. Wilson began gathering his materials. "She'll fight, but our position is strong. I wouldn't be surprised if Bernard advises her to accept the terms once he reviews everything more carefully." "You don't know my mother," Drew said grimly. "She never surrenders. She just changes tactics." I moved to sit beside him, resting, my head against his shoulder. "Then we'll be ready." "She won't wait 48 hours, I said, rubbing my lower back as Wilson departed with promises to remain on standby. "Vivian's already planning her countermove." Drew nodded grimly, locking the door behind our attorney. "I know. The question is, what form will it take?" We didn't have to wait long for our answer. Less than 3 hours after the confrontation, Drew's phone began buzzing incessantly. Missed calls from his architectural firm's partners, urgent text messages from colleagues, and finally, a formal email from the managing partner requesting an immediate meeting. "What's happening?" I asked as Drew stared at his phone in disbelief. "Mom happened," he said, showing me the email. "She's friends with Harold Winters, the founding partner. Look at the subject line. Concerning allegations regarding Hayes' family. Trust." I scanned the message, my stomach nodding as I read. The email referenced serious concerns brought to our attention and potential conflicts of interest requiring immediate clarification. "She's going after your job," I whispered, "because she can't control the house." Drew's expression hardened. "She knows exactly where to apply pressure. The firm has strict policies about financial disclosures and potential conflicts. If she's implied I've hidden financial arrangements or misused client information. But you haven't done any of those things." "Truth isn't the point," he replied, already typing a response. "The allegation alone creates doubt, and doubt is dangerous in a field built on trust and reputation." While Drew arranged to meet with the partners the following morning, I made calls of my own. First to Penny, updating her on the situation, then to Wilson, alerting him to Vivian's first counterattack. Classic deflection strategy, Wilson noted. She's creating a crisis in another arena to force you to abandon or delay the property challenge. Will it work? I asked. Not legally, he assured me. But psychologically? That depends on how well you both stand firm under pressure. The pressure escalated rapidly. By evening, Drew received a formal notice from the firm placing him on paid administrative leave, pending investigation of undisclosed financial entanglements that allegedly created conflicts with two major development projects. This is insane, Drew muttered, pacing our living room. She's fabricated connections that don't exist. I've never used firm resources for personal gain or shared confidential information. I watched him from the couch, one hand absently, rubbing my belly as our daughter kicked vigorously. She's trying to make you desperate enough to surrender the house claim. I know, he sighed, running his hands through his hair. And it might work. We're about to have a baby, Nora. If I lose my job over false allegations. We'll manage, I said with more confidence than I felt. My freelance work is picking up, and Penny's offered to let us stay with her as long as we need. Drew stopped pacing, his expression softening as he looked at me. You'd really give up the house? After everything? The house was never the point, I said quietly. It was what the house represented. Our independence, our future together. As long as we have that, we can rebuild anywhere. Before Drew could respond, his phone chimed with a text message from an unfamiliar number. He frowned as he read it. What now? I asked. It's from Harriet, he said, showing me the screen. The actual Harriet, not her daughter. She wants to meet us tomorrow morning. Says she has information about Mom we should know. I straightened, wincing at a twinge in my back. Do you think it's legitimate? The number matches the one in the original sale documents, Drew confirmed. But it could be a setup. We agreed to meet Harriet at a public cafe near the hospital, both for safety and because, at nearly 8 months pregnant, I wanted to be close to medical care just in case. The night passed fitfully, both of us too anxious for proper sleep, jumping at every sound outside our windows. Morning brought a fresh wave of tactics from Vivian, an email from our mortgage company citing concerns about ownership disputes and requesting immediate clarification. A voicemail from Bernard, suggesting that criminal charges for mortgage fraud could be considered if we proceeded with our claim. She's escalating, Wilson warned when we called him. These are intimidation tactics, but they show she's worried. Stay the course. The cafe was busy when we arrived, a good sign, as it meant witnesses if this was indeed some kind of trap. Harriet was already there, a petite woman in her 70s with silver hair and alert eyes that assessed us keenly as we approached. Drew and Nora Hayes, she said, extending a surprisingly firm handshake. Thank you for meeting me. You said you have information about my mother, Drew prompted after we ordered. Harriet nodded, her expression grave. I've known Vivian for over 30 years. We served on the hospital board together back when your father was still alive. You're not bridge partners? I asked, though we'd already suspected as much. I haven't played bridge since my arthritis worsened 15 years ago, she confirmed. But that's the least of the fabrications. She withdrew a folder from her handbag, sliding it across the table. My daughter never owned your house. I did, and I never intended to sell it. Drew and I exchanged confused glances. I don't understand, he said. We have the sale documents. We've been making mortgage payments. To whom? Harriet asked. Check your statements carefully. The receiving entity is Hayes Family Holdings, not a traditional mortgage company. My hands trembled as I pulled up our online banking app, navigating to the mortgage payments. She was right. The recipient wasn't the bank we thought we'd secured our loan through, but an LLC we'd never heard of. Hayes Family Holdings, Drew read aloud, his voice hollow. Mom created a shell company to handle the transaction. Vivian approached me last year, Harriet explained. She knew I was considering downsizing eventually and made what seemed like a generous offer to purchase my home when I was ready. She mentioned her son and his wife were expecting and needed a larger place. But we didn't know we were expecting. Until after we bought the house, I said, the timeline not matching up. Harriet nodded grimly. Exactly. She told me you were already pregnant last January, months before you actually were. She had this planned from the beginning. Drew's face paled. So the house was never actually for sale on the open. Market, Harriet confirmed. Vivian orchestrated the entire situation, convinced me to sign transfer paperwork that apparently gave her control of the property temporarily, then manipulated the sale to you through her holding company. The tax delinquency? I asked, pieces falling into place. Never existed, Harriet stated flatly. I've paid my taxes promptly for 40 years. When I saw the property tax records had been accessed and altered, I began investigating. That's when I discovered what Vivian had done. Drew looked shell-shocked. Why are you telling us this now? Because yesterday Vivian called demanding I back up her story about bridge clubs and my daughter's financial problems, Harriet replied, her expression hardening. She wanted me to lie to protect her scheme. I may have been foolish enough to trust her initially, but I won't be party to defrauding a young couple about to have a child. She pushed the folder closer. These are copies of my original property records, tax receipts, and correspondence with Vivian. I've already spoken with my attorney about filing charges for document falsification and identity fraud, but I wanted to warn you first. As we thanked her, my phone chimed with a text from Wilson. Vivian's attorney just called. She's willing to discuss terms. Meeting set for 2 p.m. today. I showed Drew the message, understanding dawning on both our faces. Vivian's sudden willingness to negotiate wasn't because of our legal leverage. It was because Harriet had discovered her scheme, threatening something far worse than losing control of our house. She's running scared, Drew said quietly. Harriet reached across the table, her weathered hand covering mine. Be careful. Desperate people make dangerous choices. We arrived at Wilson's office 20 minutes early for the meeting with Vivian, bringing Harriet's documentation and a renewed sense of purpose. The revelations had transformed our understanding of the situation completely. This wasn't just about a controlling mother-in-law overstepping boundaries, but a calculated long-term scheme that bordered on criminal. This changes our negotiating position significantly, Wilson observed as he reviewed Harriet's documents. What Vivian has done goes beyond civil disputes over property rights. There are potential criminal implications here: fraud, falsification of documents, identity theft. Drew shook his head, still processing the betrayal. I knew my mother could be controlling, but this level of manipulation, why would she go to such lengths? Control is addictive, I suggested quietly. After your father died, she centered her entire identity around being your protector and decision-maker. The idea of losing that role when you married me must have been intolerable to her. Wilson nodded in agreement. I've seen similar dynamics in estate disputes. It's rarely about the actual property. It's about what the property represents, in terms of power and relationships. At precisely 2 o'clock, the receptionist announced Vivian's arrival. She entered Wilson's conference room alone. No Bernard, no other legal representation. A calculated move that immediately put us on alert. Drew, darling, she greeted, as if yesterday's confrontation had never happened. She barely acknowledged my presence with a curt nod. I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. I'm here to discuss a reasonable compromise. Where's Bernard? Drew asked, not returning her warm smile. He had another commitment, Vivian replied smoothly, settling into a chair across from us. After reviewing the situation, I decided a more personal approach would be appropriate. We are family, after all. Wilson cleared his throat. Mrs. Hayes, I should inform you that proceeding without legal counsel present is inadvisable, given the circumstances. I'm quite capable of handling my own affairs, Vivian dismissed, focusing on Drew. Sweetheart, this unpleasantness has gone too far. Your position at the firm is at risk. Stress isn't good for Nora or the baby. I'm willing to modify our arrangement, to give you both peace of mind. Her tone was reasonable, concerned. The loving mother worried about her son's well-being. If I hadn't seen the mask slip so many times before, I might have been convinced. What exactly are you proposing? Drew asked, his voice carefully neutral. Vivian smiled, reaching into her designer handbag to extract a document. I've drafted a new agreement. I'll reduce my ownership stake to 25%, purely as a silent partner. No input on renovations, no decisions about the living arrangements. You'll have complete autonomy in your daily lives. She slid the document toward Drew. In exchange, you'll withdraw any challenges to the original agreement and clarify the misunderstanding with your firm. A simple miscommunication, easily resolved. And if we refuse? I asked, speaking for the first time. Vivian's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. Then, unfortunately, matters will have to proceed through more formal channels. The firm's ethics committee is very thorough in their investigations. Such processes can drag on for months, even years. She glanced pointedly at my pregnant belly. Quite difficult to support a family under such circumstances. Wilson reached for the document, but Drew placed his hand over it first. Before we discuss this further, there's something you should know. He slid Harriet's folder across the table. We met with Harriet Lawrence this morning. The change in Vivian was instantaneous and dramatic. The color drained from her face, her poised demeanor crumbling as she stared at the folder without touching it. Harriet has provided us with some very interesting documentation, I continued, watching her reactions carefully. About the property, taxes that were never actually delinquent. About the Hayes Family Holdings LLC that's been receiving our mortgage payments. About how you approached her last year, months before we were even pregnant, to arrange the purchase of a house we didn't, yet know we needed. There's been some misunderstanding, Vivian attempted, but her voice lacked conviction. No misunderstanding, Drew said firmly. You orchestrated this entire situation from the beginning. You manipulated us into buying a house we couldn't afford. Through a company you secretly controlled, created fake problems that only you could solve, and then used those solutions to gain legal control over our lives. Everything I did was for your benefit, Vivian insisted, a note of desperation entering her voice. You needed guidance. Both of you were making such poor financial decisions. I was protecting your future. By committing fraud? Wilson interjected. By falsifying tax records? By creating a shell company to handle a mortgage that isn't even legitimate? Vivian straightened, regaining some composure. Those are serious allegations that would be very difficult to prove in court. Harriet has already filed a police report, I said, bluffing slightly. Harriet had mentioned planning to file, but hadn't confirmed she'd done so yet. Her documentation is quite comprehensive. And the county records office is investigating the unauthorized alterations to the property tax history, Drew added, another careful embellishment of Harriet's stated intentions. Vivian's hands trembled slightly as she withdrew them from the table. What do you want? Full transfer of the property back to us, Wilson stated promptly. Dissolution of Hayes Family Holdings, LLC. Return of all mortgage payments made thus far, with interest. A legally binding agreement that you will have no financial claim on the property and no right to enter it without express invitation. Impossible, Vivian scoffed. You can't afford the house without my support. You never could. Actually, Drew countered, according to Harriet, the real value of the house is considerably less than what you led us to believe. Without the fictional tax delinquency and exaggerated repair costs, it's well within our budget. And the mortgage, We've been paying? I pressed. Where has that money been going, Vivian? Into Hayes Family Holdings accounts? Your accounts? She didn't answer, her gaze fixed on some middle distance as she calculated her options. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold and precise. You would do this to me? Threaten me with legal action? With criminal charges? Your own mother, Drew? You did this to yourself, Drew replied quietly. When you decided that controlling our lives was more important than loving us? Vivian stood abruptly. I need to consult with my attorney. This meeting is over. You have 24 hours, Wilson informed her. After that, we move forward with both civil and criminal proceedings. She paused at the door, turning, back with an expression I'd never seen before, not anger or calculation, but genuine fear. You don't understand what you're doing. This will destroy everything. No, I corrected her. It will just rebuild it, honestly. After she left, the three of us sat in silence for several moments, processing what had just occurred. She's cornered, Wilson observed, but that makes her unpredictable. Be prepared for one last desperate move. Drew nodded grimly. With my mother, the most dangerous moment is when she realizes she's lost control. What kind of move? I asked, one hand protective over my belly as our daughter kicked vigorously as if sensing the tension. Hard to predict, Wilson admitted, but given what we know about her methods, I'd expect something designed to create an immediate crisis that forces you to accept her terms to resolve it. Drew's phone chimed with a text message. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. Like having the utilities shut off at our house? Water, electricity, gas, all disconnected due to ownership dispute. She works fast, Wilson muttered, already reaching for his phone. I'll get an emergency injunction. And I'll call Penny, I said, my mind racing. We may need somewhere to stay tonight. As Drew drove us back to the house, I stared out the window, one thought repeating in my mind. This had to end, one way or another, before our daughter was born. I refused to bring her into a world where Vivian's manipulations overshadowed her first days. What I didn't realize was that Vivian had one final card to play, one that would force us to confront not just her schemes, but the fundamental question of what truly makes a house a home. We arrived home to find the house dark and unnervingly silent. No humming refrigerator, no clicking thermostat, just the hollow emptiness of a space stripped of its life-giving systems. Outside, a bright orange notice had been taped to our front door. Utilities suspended due to property dispute. Contact Hayes Family Holdings for resolution. She didn't waste any time, Drew muttered, tearing down the notice as we entered. The house felt immediately hostile without its basic functions. No lights, no heat despite the autumn chill, no running water. I checked my phone, only 2 bars of battery remaining, and called Penny to arrange our temporary relocation. Pack what you need for a few days, she instructed. And Nora, bring your important papers. I don't trust Vivian not to try something even more drastic. Drew was already grabbing flashlights from the emergency kit, his expression grim in the fading afternoon light. Wilson says the emergency injunction to restore utilities won't be issued until morning at the earliest. We moved through the house with practiced efficiency, gathering clothes, medications, my pregnancy documents, and the few sentimental items we couldn't bear to leave behind. As I carefully packed my grandmother's handmade baby blanket, one of the few things that had survived Vivian's numerous cleanings, a sharp pain lanced across my lower back. Nora? Drew noticed my wince immediately. What's wrong? Just Braxton Hicks, I assured him, referring to the practice contractions I'd been experiencing occasionally. The stress isn't helping, but I'm fine. He looked unconvinced, but continued, packing. When he disappeared upstairs to gather toiletries, I sank onto our couch, breathing deeply through another wave of discomfort. I was only at 34 weeks, too early for real labor. Just stress and dehydration, I told myself. The baby kicked reassuringly, as if agreeing with my self-diagnosis. As twilight deepened outside our windows, the house transformed into a landscape of shadows and unfamiliar silhouettes. This place that should have represented our fresh start, our family's foundation, now felt like a battleground. Each room marked by Vivian's interference, each surface bearing the memory of some boundary crossed. "I think that's everything essential," Drew said, returning with our toiletry bags. "Penny said she'd be here in 15 minutes. I nodded, still focused on my breathing. "Did you get the copy of the deed and Harriet's documents?" "All in my briefcase," he confirmed, sitting beside me. "How are you feeling, really?" Before I could answer, headlights swept across our front windows as a vehicle pulled into our driveway. "That was fast," I remarked, assuming Penny had arrived early. But it wasn't Penny's pickup truck illuminating our walkway. It was Vivian's luxury sedan. "What now?" Drew muttered, moving to the window. "She's got someone with her." I joined him, peering through the glass to see Vivian emerging from her car, followed by a middle-aged man in a uniform I didn't recognize. "That's not Bernard," I observed. "No," Drew agreed, his voice tight. "That's a sheriff's deputy." My heart raced as they approached our front door. What new tactic was this? Had she actually filed some kind of charges against us? The doorbell rang, its chime somehow more ominous in the darkened house. Drew opened the door, positioning himself slightly in front of me in a protective stance. "Mom?" he acknowledged coldly, then nodded to the officer. "Deputy." "Mr. Hayes." The deputy began formally. "I'm here to execute an eviction notice for this property, filed by Hayes Family Holdings, LLC. "Eviction?" I echoed in disbelief, one hand instinctively cradling my belly. "That's impossible. We're the legal owners." "According to the documentation I've been provided," the deputy continued, "you've been renting this property from Hayes Family Holdings, and you're now in violation of the rental agreement due to unauthorized modifications and non-payment of appropriate fees." Vivian stood slightly behind the officer, her expression a perfect mask of regretful concern. "I tried to resolve this amicably," she said, addressing her words to the deputy rather than to us. "But they've left me no choice. The property is being damaged, and as the responsible party, I have obligations to protect the asset." Drew's voice remained remarkably steady. "Deputy, there's been a misunderstanding. We purchased this home, not rented it. We have documentation proving ownership and evidence of fraudulent activity by Hayes Family Holdings." "Son, I understand this is upsetting," the deputy replied, his tone suggesting he'd handled many such domestic disputes. "But I have a court order here requiring you to vacate the premises immediately. You can contest it through proper legal channels, but tonight, you need to gather your essential belongings and leave." I felt lightheaded, another pain radiating across my back. This couldn't be happening. Not now, with our daughter due in just 6 weeks. Not like this, forced out of our home by the woman who should have been supporting us. "Deputy," I managed, fighting to keep my voice from shaking. "I'm 34 weeks pregnant. We've had our utilities shut off without notice. Surely there must be some provision for—" "Which is precisely why immediate relocation is in your best interest," Vivian interjected smoothly. "A house without utilities is no place for a woman in your condition. I've arranged a hotel room for tonight while this unfortunate situation is resolved." The calculation behind her generosity was transparent. Separate us, isolate Drew from my influence, regain control through forced gratitude. The same tactics she'd employed throughout our relationship, just escalated to a new level of audacity. "We have alternate arrangements," Drew stated firmly, "and we'll be contesting this eviction immediately. Our attorney is already filing emergency motions regarding the utilities." The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "I understand, sir, but the Order is still valid until contested. I need to ask you to— He was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle, Penny's pickup truck, rumbling into the driveway like cavalry arriving at the last moment. My sister emerged, taking in the scene with one quick, assessing glance before striding toward us. "What's going on here?" she demanded, positioning herself beside me. "Ma'am, I'm executing an eviction order," the deputy began. "No, you're not," came another voice, Wilson Delgado's, as he emerged from the passenger side of Penny's truck. "Not until you've reviewed this emergency stay." He handed the deputy a document bearing an official court seal. "Filed electronically and approved by Judge Mercer 20 minutes ago. You'll find everything in order." The deputy examined the document, his expression shifting from obligation to uncertainty. "This appears to be valid, but I'll need to call this in to confirm." As he stepped away to make his call, Vivian's composed facade cracked. "This is ridiculous," she hissed at Wilson. "You can't possibly have secured a stay this quickly." "Judge Mercer takes a special interest in cases involving potentially fraudulent evictions of pregnant women," Wilson replied calmly, "particularly when presented with evidence of document falsification and utility tampering." The deputy returned, his manner notably different. "The stay is confirmed," he told us. "The eviction is suspended pending further judicial review." Vivian's face contorted with barely controlled rage. "This is absurd. They're damaging my property." "They have no right to—" "Mrs. Hayes," the deputy cut in, "I strongly suggest you leave these premises now. The stay order mentions potential harassment concerns." For a moment, I thought she might actually lose control completely. Her hands clenched into fists, color flooding her normally composed features. Then, with visible effort, she reassembled her mask. "This isn't over," she said quietly, addressing Drew rather than me. Not by a long shot. As her car pulled away, I sagged against Drew, another contraction, stronger this time, rippling across my abdomen. "Nora?" Penny's voice sharpened with concern. "I think," I said carefully, "we might need to go to the hospital instead of your apartment." Drew's face paled. "The baby? It's too early." "Probably just stress," I assured him, though I was less convinced than before. But better safe than sorry. As Penny helped me to her truck, I looked back at our house. Dark, contested, transformed from dream home to battleground. Yet somehow, standing firm against Vivian's most extreme measures had changed something fundamental in how I viewed the situation. This wasn't just about property rights or legal ownership anymore. It was about reclaiming our power to define our own lives, to establish our own boundaries. Whether or not we ultimately kept this particular house, we had already begun building something more important. A family strong enough to withstand Vivian's manipulations. And that transformation, I realized as we drove toward the hospital, was the true foundation we needed for our daughter's future. The hospital's triage room was a stark contrast to our darkened house, blindingly bright, antiseptic, and filled with the steady beeping of monitors tracking both my vitals and our daughter's heartbeat. After an hour of observation, the doctor confirmed what I'd suspected. "False labor," she explained, reviewing the contraction monitor. "Brought on by dehydration and stress. Your body's sending warning signals, Mrs. Hayes." "So the baby's okay?" Drew asked, gripping my hand tightly. "Perfectly fine," the doctor assured us. "Strong heartbeat, good movement. But," she added, fixing me with a stern look, "you need to minimize stress for the next 6 weeks. Preterm labor is a real risk in high-stress situations." After receiving IV fluids and strict instructions to rest, I was discharged near midnight. The utilities at our house remained disconnected, so we headed to Penny's apartment, all of us exhausted from the day's events. "You take the bedroom," Penny insisted, already converting her couch into a makeshift bed for herself. "I've put fresh sheets on everything." I was too tired to argue, collapsing onto her bed while Drew brought in our hastily packed bags. Just before I drifted off, I heard his phone chime with a message. "Who's texting at this hour?" I murmured sleepily. Drew stared at his screen, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "It's from Mom." I forced myself back to alertness. What does she want now? "To meet tomorrow," he said, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. "Just her and me. She says she's ready to end this painful situation once and for all." Warning bells rang in my mind. It's another manipulation. She's trying to isolate you, get you alone where she can work on your emotions without anyone interfering. "I know," he sighed, setting the phone aside. "But what if this is our chance to finally resolve everything? What if she's genuinely ready to surrender? After what she pulled today?" I shook my head. She had us evicted, Drew. She claimed we were renters and filed false documents with the sheriff's department. That's not someone preparing to surrender. He lay down beside me, staring at the ceiling. "You're right. But I need to end this, Nora. For you, for the baby, for all of us. I can't keep fighting her while you're at risk of preterm labor." "We'll end it together," I insisted, taking his hand. "That's the only way this works. As a united front. The moment she gets you alone, she'll deploy every emotional weapon in her arsenal." Drew was quiet for a long moment. What if I recorded the conversation? Brought Wilson's associate as a witness? She'd still think she was getting what she wanted, me alone, but I'd have protection from her manipulations. The idea had merit. Wilson did say her next move would be desperate. Maybe we can use that desperation to our advantage. We spent the next hour formulating a plan, finally falling asleep as dawn began to lighten Penny's bedroom curtains. Morning came too quickly, with Wilson arriving at 8 a.m. to discuss strategy. "Recording the conversation is smart," he agreed, "but having a witness is even better. My associate Clara can accompany you as your legal advisor. Not threatening enough to send Vivian running, but sufficient to keep everything above board." "What about the utilities at our house?" I asked. "And the eviction attempt?" "The utilities should be restored by noon today per the judge's order," Wilson explained. "And I've filed a formal complaint about the fraudulent eviction. The sheriff's department is not happy about being misled." Drew nodded, checking his watch. "Mom wants to meet at 10 a.m. at Bernard's office." "Not neutral territory," Wilson noted with a frown. "She's ensuring home field advantage." "I'll be careful," Drew promised. "Clara will have the documents ready if Mom actually agrees to surrender her claims." "Everything prepared," Wilson confirmed. "Full transfer of property rights back to you and Nora, dissolution of Hayes family holdings, and a legally binding agreement regarding future contact and boundaries." As Drew prepared to leave, I felt a flutter of anxiety. Despite our precautions, Vivian had proven remarkably adept at emotional manipulation, particularly with her son. Would our preparations be enough? "Remember," I said, hugging him tightly at the door, "she'll try to reframe everything, paint herself as the victim, make you feel guilty for standing up to her. She might even threaten to cut you off completely." "I know her playbook," he assured me, though I detected uncertainty beneath his confidence. "I'll call you as soon as it's done, one way or another." After he left, Wilson, Penny, and I gathered around Penny's kitchen table, reviewing contingency plans while we waited. The minutes crept by with excruciating slowness. "Should we have heard something by now?" I asked, checking my phone for the dozenth time in an hour. "These negotiations can take time," Wilson reassured me, though I noticed him glancing at his own watch with increasing frequency. When Drew finally called around noon, his voice sounded strained. "Can you come to Bernard's office, all of you? There's something you need to see." "What happened?" I demanded, immediately alert. Are you okay? I'm fine, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Mom wants to speak with everyone together. She says she has proof. We won't want made public. My stomach clenched with foreboding. Proof of what? She wouldn't tell me specifically, just that it changes everything about our situation. Wilson should definitely be here. We arrived at Bernard's plush downtown office 30 minutes later, directed by a somber receptionist to a large conference room where Drew waited with Clara, Vivian, and Bernard. The tension in the room was palpable, like oxygen had been replaced with something heavier and more difficult to breathe. Drew's face was ashen, his eyes meeting mine with a complicated mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. Vivian, by contrast, appeared almost serene, her composure fully restored after yesterday's uncharacteristic display of anger. Nora, dear, she greeted me with poisonous politeness. I'm so glad you could join us for this family meeting. What's this about, Vivian? I asked directly, taking the seat beside Drew. What proof are you claiming to have? Bernard cleared his throat, sliding a folder across the polished table. Before we proceed, I want to make clear that Hayes Family Holdings has always operated within legal parameters, despite recent accusations. Wilson reached for the folder, but Vivian placed her hand on it first. I think Nora should see this directly. After all, it concerns her most intimately. The way she emphasized intimately sent a chill through me. I pulled the folder from beneath her manicured fingers and opened it. Inside was a stack of papers, financial records, bank statements, and credit reports. My bank statements, my credit reports, documents I'd never authorized anyone to access. What is this? I demanded, scanning the highlighted sections. How did you get my personal financial information? That's hardly relevant, Vivian dismissed. What matters is what these records show. I continued reading, my confusion growing. The document showed regular payments from my personal account to a company called Phoenix Design Collective over the past 5 years, payments ranging from $2,000 to $8,000, totaling nearly $200,000. I've never heard of Phoenix Design, I said, looking up in bewilderment. I've never made these payments. And yet, Bernard interjected smoothly, the transactions appear on your bank statements. Regular payments from your personal account, not joint accounts with Drew, notably, to a company that specializes in acquiring and flipping distressed properties. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. I turned to Drew, whose expression had transformed from ashen to confused. This is absurd, I told him. You know I've never had this kind of money. My freelance work barely covered my student loans before we were married. Which raises the question, Vivian said, her voice dripping with false concern. Where did the money come from? And why keep these investments secret from your husband? Wilson was already examining the documents with professional scrutiny. These appear to be altered, he observed. The formatting of these transaction records doesn't match standard bank statement layouts. Baseless accusations, Bernard replied. We obtained these through legal channels. If Ms. Mrs. Hayes, wishes to claim fraud, that would require a formal investigation, one that would necessarily probe deeply into her financial history. The threat was clear. Pursue this, and they'd ensure a humiliating, invasive examination of my finances, dragging out our conflict even longer. What exactly are you suggesting? Drew asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Vivian leaned forward, her expression a masterpiece of maternal concern. Only that perhaps Nora hasn't been entirely forthcoming about her financial situation. That perhaps her interest in the house might not be as sentimental as she's claimed. This is another manipulation, I stated flatly. Just like everything else you've done. I have no connection to Phoenix Design Collective. I've never had secret investments. This is a fabrication, just like the tax delinquency, just like the eviction order. Then you won't mind signing this, Bernard said, producing another document. A simple authorization for a complete financial audit. If you have nothing to hide, it should resolve this question immediately. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Refuse, and I'd appear guilty of financial deception. Agree, and they'd drag out the process for months, creating yet another source of stress and conflict. Between Drew and me, I was about to respond when Penny, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. Phoenix Design Collective, she said, pulling out her phone. Based in Arizona, incorporated 5 years ago? Bernard nodded, clearly surprised by her knowledge. That's correct. Funny coincidence, Penny continued, thumbing through her phone. I just finished a website for a client who mentioned working with them last year. Said they were a front for some high-end real estate investors. Playing tax games. She turned her phone around, showing us a LinkedIn page. Phoenix Design Collective's CEO is, well, look at that. Patricia Winters. Any relation to Harold Winters, the founding partner at Drew's firm? The one you're friends with, Vivian? The conference room fell silent. Vivian's perfect composure slipped, just slightly, a tightening around her eyes, a momentary clench of her jaw. I have no idea what you're implying, she said stiffly. I think you do, Penny countered. I think you created these fake transactions using your connection to Harold Winters and his wife's company? Probably the same way you fabricated the tax delinquency and the rental agreement. You're getting sloppy, Vivian. Desperate people make mistakes. Wilson was already on his feet. I've seen enough. These documents constitute fraudulent misrepresentation at best, criminal fraud at worst. We'll be filing formal complaints with the state bar regarding Mr. Bernard's conduct and pursuing all available legal remedies for this latest attempt at manipulation. You can't prove anything, Bernard blustered, though his confidence had visibly diminished. Actually, Clara spoke up, holding up her phone. This entire conversation has been recorded, with permission from Mr. Hayes. Pretty compelling evidence of attempted fraud. Drew stood, his decision made. We're done here. Mom, I gave you a chance to end this honorably. Instead, you tried to destroy my marriage with fabricated evidence. There's nothing left to discuss. Vivian's facade finally cracked completely. You're making a terrible mistake, she said, her voice raw with emotion that seemed, for once, genuine. Everything I've done has been to protect you. From what? Drew demanded. From happiness? From independence? From building my own family? From losing everything, she snapped. Your father trusted people too easily. He let others make decisions, handle the finances, manage our lives. When he died, I discovered we were nearly bankrupt because he'd been too trusting, too willing, to let others take control. The revelation hung in the air, illuminating years of Vivian's controlling behavior in a new light. So you decided to control everything instead, Drew said softly. To never trust anyone else with decisions that affected you. I decided to never be vulnerable again, Vivian corrected, her composure reassembling itself with visible effort. And I didn't want that for you. I saw how easily she influenced you, how quickly you changed your plans, your priorities, your future once she came into your life. I flinched at the raw hatred in her voice when she referred to me. This wasn't just about control. It was about Vivian's deep-seated fear of being replaced, of losing her central role in Drew's life. Mom, Drew said, his voice gentler than I'd expected. Dad's financial mistakes didn't happen because he trusted people. They happened because he trusted the wrong people. There's a difference between being cautious and being controlling. He moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. I trust Nora. Not blindly, but completely. She's my partner, not my rival for control. That's something you've never understood about marriage. Vivian's eyes glistened with unshed tears, Whether from genuine emotion or strategic display, I couldn't tell. "You'll regret this decision." "No," Drew replied with quiet certainty. "I think for the first time in years I won't have regrets, because I'm finally making my own choices." He turned to Bernard. "We'll expect full transfer documents for the house by end of business tomorrow. Complete dissolution of Hayes family, holdings, and a notarized statement acknowledging that all claims against us were fraudulent." "Or?" Bernard challenged, though without much conviction. Wilson answered for us. "Or we proceed with criminal charges for fraud, document falsification, unauthorized access to financial records, and abuse of legal process. The district attorney's office has already expressed interest in the falsified eviction order." As we gathered our belongings to leave, Vivian made one final attempt. "Drew," she called, her voice breaking slightly. "If you walk out that door, we're finished. Do you understand? I won't be there when this all falls apart." Drew paused at the threshold, turning back to face his mother. "That's your choice, Mom. Just like this was your choice. For what it's worth, I hope someday you understand the difference between loving someone and controlling them." The door closed behind us with quiet finality. In the hallway, Drew pulled me into a tight embrace, his whole body trembling with emotion. "Are you okay?" I whispered against his shoulder. "No," he admitted honestly. "But I will be, we will be." As we left the building, stepping into the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt a weight lift. Not just the immediate pressure of Vivian's schemes, but the heavier burden of living under her influence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them as partners, not as pawns in someone else's game. Drew's phone chimed with a message from Wilson's office. "The utilities have been restored at the house," he reported. "We can go home." Home. The word held new meaning now, not just a physical structure with walls and a roof, but a space defined by trust, honesty, and mutual respect. A foundation for the family we were creating together. As we drove toward our Craftsman house, I rested one hand on my belly, feeling our daughter's reassuring movements. "We should paint those clouds back on the nursery ceiling," I said. "The ones Vivian had painted over." Drew smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen in weeks. "I was thinking the same thing. Maybe some stars too. A whole night sky for her to dream under." For the first time since discovering Vivian's manipulations, the future stretched before us clear and open. Not without challenges, but free from the shadow that had darkened our lives for so long. The house waiting for us was just a structure, but what we would build within it was something Vivian had never understood and could never control. A home founded on love rather than fear, on partnership rather than power. 6 weeks later, as the first snowfall of winter dusted our craftsman's roof with crystalline white, I sat in the newly finished nursery, admiring the night sky Drew had painted across the ceiling. Stars of varying sizes twinkled against a deep, blue background, constellations carefully researched and precisely positioned, with the cloud formations I'd originally envisioned floating dreamily among them. "Perfect timing," I told our daughter, who squirmed beneath my palm. "You waited until everything was ready." My due date had arrived exactly on schedule, the contractions beginning in the early morning hours with gentle regularity. Unlike the false labor scare, these pains built steadily, unmistakably announcing the imminent arrival of our daughter. Drew appeared in the doorway, car keys in hand, hospital bag over his shoulder. "How are you doing? Ready to go?" I nodded, allowing him to help me from the rocking chair we'd restored together, one of many projects we'd completed in the weeks since reclaiming our home. Each renovation, each decoration choice, each piece of furniture had become a declaration of independence, a conscious reclaiming of the space that had nearly been taken from us. The transformation wasn't just physical. In the aftermath of our final confrontation with Vivian, the legal proceedings had moved with surprising swiftness. Bernard, faced with potential disbarment and criminal charges, had quickly produced all the documentation we demanded, properly transferring the house entirely to our names and dissolving Hayes Family Holdings, LLC. Harriet had been instrumental in unraveling the web of deception, providing records that proved the tax delinquency had been fabricated. The sheriff's department had formally apologized for the attempted eviction, launching an internal investigation into how such fraudulent documents had made it through their verification process. As for Vivian, she had maintained her promise to cut contact completely. Her house had been listed for sale 2 weeks after our confrontation, and according to mutual acquaintances, she had moved to Arizona, perhaps not coincidentally, the home state of Phoenix Design Collective. Contraction? Drew asked, noticing my sudden intake of breath. I nodded, focusing on my breathing until the wave passed. 7 minutes apart now. Definitely time to go. The drive to the hospital was surreal, the same route we'd taken during the false labor. Scare, but with an entirely different emotional landscape. No fear, no stress, just anticipation and the peaceful knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Penny met us at the hospital entrance, camera in hand, to document our daughter's arrival. "How's my favorite mama to be?" she greeted, hugging me awkwardly around my enormous belly. "Ready," I replied simply, pausing as another contraction built and receded. The next 12 hours passed in the intense focus of labor, the world narrowing to breath, pain, rest, repeat. Drew never left my side, his steady presence anchoring me through the most challenging moments. When our daughter finally arrived, her indignant cry filling the delivery room, the months of conflict and stress seemed to dissolve into insignificance. "Eliza Grace Hayes," I whispered, as they placed her on my chest, her tiny body warm against my skin. We'd chosen the name together, Grace for my grandmother, Eliza simply because we loved it. Notably absent was any family name from Vivian's side, a small but deliberate choice that signified our new beginning. Drew's eyes glistened as he touched her delicate fingers. "She's perfect," he murmured, awe evident in his voice. "Absolutely perfect." Penny captured the moment with her camera, then quietly excused herself to get coffee, though I suspected she simply wanted to give us privacy for these first precious moments as a family of 3. "I've been thinking," Drew said, perching carefully on the edge of the hospital bed beside us, "about the deed. The original deed that started everything." I looked up from Eliza's perfect face, curious. "What about it?" "That inheritance clause, the one that said all partial ownership interests revert to the original joint tenants if the right of first refusal isn't honored." He stroked Eliza's downy head with gentle fingers. "I want to add something similar to our will. Something that protects Eliza's inheritance from being manipulated or controlled by others." The parallel wasn't lost on me. "A surprise waiting in the deed," I said softly. "Protection built into the foundation." "Exactly." He met my eyes, his expression serious. "I don't want her to ever experience what we went through. I want her legacy to be security, not control." I nodded, understanding completely. "We'll build those protections, not just legally, but in how we raise her, teaching her to recognize manipulation, to value independence, to understand the difference between love and control." Eliza yawned dramatically, her tiny fists clenching and unclenching against my skin. Both of us laughed at her perfect timing. "I think she approves," Drew said. 2 days later, we brought Eliza home to the house that had become a symbol of our resilience. Penny had been busy in our absence, hanging a hand-painted welcome banner across the porch and filling the refrigerator with prepared meals for the challenging days ahead. As we crossed the threshold, Eliza bundled securely in my arms, I was struck by how different the house felt from when we'd first purchased it. Gone were Vivian's cream and sage color schemes, replaced by the vibrant blues and yellows we'd originally chosen. The furniture had been rearranged according to our preferences, the artwork selected to reflect our tastes, the entire space reconfigured to support our growing family. "Welcome home, Eliza," Drew said, taking her from me so I could rest on the couch. "Your very first home." "Hopefully not the last," I remarked, settling into the cushions with a grateful sigh. "I've been thinking about that too. This house will always be special. Our first home, where we fought for our independence, where Eliza was brought home. But someday, we might want something that doesn't carry so many complicated memories." Drew nodded thoughtfully. "Something we choose together from the beginning. No manipulations, no hidden agendas." "Exactly." I watched as he expertly swaddled Eliza, his movements confident despite his initial fears about caring for someone so tiny. "But that's for the future. For now, this is exactly where we need to be." The following weeks passed in the blur of new parenthood. Sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, the miraculous moments of connection with our daughter balanced against the grueling physical recovery and emotional adjustments. Through it all, the house served as our sanctuary, the stable foundation we'd fought so hard to secure. 1 month after Eliza's birth, as winter settled firmly over our neighborhood, an unexpected package arrived. No return address, just our names printed in unfamiliar handwriting on the brown paper wrapping. "Should we open it?" Drew asked, examining the package cautiously. After everything we'd been through, suspicion came naturally. "Let me," Penny volunteered, having stopped by for her daily baby snuggle. "Just in case it's something unpleasant." We watched as she carefully unwrapped the package, revealing a small wooden box with intricate carvings on the lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a set of keys and a handwritten note. Drew read it aloud, his voice growing increasingly puzzled. "These belonged to Richard. He always intended them for you, but I couldn't bear to part with them after he died. It's time they went to their rightful owner. The deed is in the safety deposit box at First National, Box 714. Consider it my amends, however inadequate." The note was unsigned, but we all recognized the perfect penmanship. Vivian. "Richard was my father," Drew explained to Penny. "But what keys are these? And what deed?" The mystery was solved the following day when Drew visited the bank, accessing the safety deposit box with the keys from the package. Inside was a deed to a lakeside cabin 3 hours north, a modest vacation property his father had purchased shortly before his death, apparently without Vivian's knowledge or involvement. Dad used to talk about buying a place at Cedar Lake. Drew recalled as he showed me the documents. He said it would be for family vacations, fishing trips, winter skating. I thought it was just talk, another dream that never materialized. But it did, I realized, examining the deed. And Vivian kept it secret all these years. The deed was in Richard Hayes's name alone, with a specific bequest to Drew upon his death, a fact Vivian had concealed for nearly a decade, maintaining control of the property through omission if not legal right. Why give it up now? Penny wondered. It doesn't fit her pattern. I thought about Vivian's actions, her desperate attempts to maintain control, her fear of vulnerability. Maybe losing everything, her relationship with Drew, her social standing, her power over our lives, forced her to reevaluate. Maybe this is her version of waving a white flag. Drew studied the property photos included with the deed. A simple A-frame cabin overlooking a serene lake, surrounded by pine trees. Or maybe she's finally acknowledging that Dad wanted me to make my own choices, have my own space, even if she couldn't understand why. We visited the cabin the following weekend, Eliza bundled against the winter chill as we explored the property that had been waiting for Drew all these years. The cabin was dusty, but well-maintained, preserved in a time capsule of his father's. Tastes and interests, fishing gear stored carefully in the shed, books on local wildlife lining the shelves, a collection of board games for rainy days stacked in a cabinet. It's like getting to know him all over again, Drew said. emotion thick in his voice as he showed Eliza the hand-carved chess set his father had left mid-game, pieces positioned as if waiting for his return. Like he created this space specifically for us to discover. As spring arrived, turning the lakeside property into a lush green retreat, we established a new tradition of monthly visits. The cabin became our escape, a place untouched by the conflicts that had marked our craftsman home. Drew taught himself to fish using his father's equipment, proudly serving his first catch for dinner on a summer evening as we ate on the cabin's weathered deck. Meanwhile, our primary home continued its transformation. The final traces of Vivian's influence disappeared as we completed renovations on our own terms, at our own pace. My freelance graphic design business expanded as I balanced work with motherhood while Drew's position at the firm was fully reinstated after Harold Winters, Vivian's former ally, retired amid questions about his wife's business practices. 1 year after Eliza's birth, we hosted a housewarming party, a belated celebration of truly making the space our own. Penny, Wilson, Harriet, and other friends who had supported us through the conflict gathered in our backyard, which now featured a vegetable garden and play area instead of the formal landscaping Vivian had planned. "To new beginnings," Harriet toasted, raising her glass as Eliza toddled unsteadily between clusters of guests, delighting everyone with her determined independence. "And to surprises in deeds," I added, exchanging a meaningful glance with Drew. "The ones that protect instead of control." Later that evening, as our guests departed and Eliza finally surrendered to sleep, Drew and I sat on our porch swing, watching fireflies illuminate the summer darkness. "I've been thinking about my mother," he said quietly, his arm warm around my shoulders. "About forgiveness." I waited, understanding the complexity of his feelings. Vivian had caused tremendous damage, yet she was still his mother, still connected to him through bonds that couldn't be entirely severed by conflict. "I'm not ready to have her in our lives again," he continued. "Maybe I never will be. But I think I understand her better now. The fear that drove her, the loss that shaped her choices." "Understanding isn't the same as excusing," I reminded him gently. "No," he agreed, "but it helps me let go of the anger. For my sake, not hers." I leaned against him, contemplating the journey we'd traveled. From the manipulated house purchase to the discovery of the protective clause in the original deed, from the painful confrontations to the unexpected gift of the cabin, each step had strengthened our partnership, clarified our values, and deepened our commitment to creating a different kind of family legacy. "We should check the new deed again," I suggested. "Make sure all the protections we wanted for Eliza are properly documented." Drew smiled, pressing a kiss to my temple. "Always thinking ahead. That's why we make such a good team." In the nursery above us, secure in her crib beneath the starry ceiling her father had painted, Eliza slept peacefully, unaware of the battles fought to secure her inheritance, both material and emotional. Someday we would tell her the story, not to burden her with family conflicts, but to empower her with the knowledge that boundaries could be maintained, manipulation resisted, and homes built on foundations of mutual respect rather than control. The deed that had once been weaponized against us now served as protection for her future, a surprise waiting not just in the legal language, but in the legacy of resilience her parents had created. A legacy built not from bricks and timber, but from hard-won wisdom about what truly makes a house into a home. 3 years passed in the rhythm of ordinary family life, Eliza's first steps giving way to running, babbling evolving into complete sentences, and the craftsman house adapting to accommodate a curious, energetic toddler. Those years brought professional growth as well. My graphic design business had expanded to include 3 part-time employees, while Drew had been promoted to senior partner at his firm, his reputation untarnished by Vivian's earlier machinations. The lake cabin became our seasonal retreat, a place where Eliza learned to swim, Drew perfected his fishing technique, and I found unexpected inspiration for a children's book series about a little girl's adventures in the woods. Life settled, into a comfortable pattern, the trauma of our property battle fading into something we discussed less frequently, though its lessons remained embedded in our choices. Until a certified letter arrived on a crisp autumn morning, bearing the return address of a law firm we didn't recognize. Moretti and Associates, Drew read, examining the envelope cautiously. Based in Phoenix. A flicker of unease passed between us. Phoenix, where Vivian had relocated after our confrontation. Open it, I urged, watching Eliza arrange her blocks into increasingly complex structures on our living room floor, blissfully, unaware of the sudden tension. Inside was a formal legal notification that managed to be simultaneously cryptic and alarming. Regarding the estate of Vivian Eleanor Hayes, your presence is requested for the reading of the will on October 17th at our offices in Phoenix, Arizona. Drew sat heavily on the couch, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. She's dead. His voice carried no obvious emotion, neither grief nor relief, just a flat statement of fact that nonetheless contained multitudes. I sat beside him, one hand on his knee, waiting for him to process the news. How do you feel? I asked finally, when the silence had stretched long enough. I don't know, he admitted, still staring at the letter. I haven't spoken to her in 3 years. Hadn't seen her since that day at Bernard's office. She was already gone in most ways that mattered. I nodded, understanding the complexity of his position. The woman who had tried to destroy our marriage, who had manipulated and schemed to control our lives, was also the mother who had raised him after his father died, who had attended his graduations and celebrated his achievements, who had, in her own misguided way, believed she was protecting him. We don't have to go, I offered. We could ask for a copy of the will, handle everything remotely. Drew shook his head slowly. No, I need to see this through. Properly. His gaze shifted to Eliza, now singing softly to herself as she constructed an elaborate block tower. But not with her. I don't want Eliza involved in any of this. Penny readily agreed to stay with Eliza, while we traveled to Phoenix, her characteristic bluntness providing unexpected comfort. If this is some final manipulation from beyond the grave, you two will handle it together, she declared. You've faced worse. The flight to Phoenix gave us time to prepare mentally to discuss contingencies for whatever awaited us. Drew researched Moretti and Associates, discovering they specialized in estate law with an impeccable reputation. Not the type of firm that would participate in dubious schemes. Maybe this really is just a standard will reading, I suggested as our plane began. It's descent, the Arizona desert stretching endlessly below us. She had to leave her assets to someone. Drew's expression remained guarded. Nothing was ever simple with my mother. I doubt that's changed, even in death. The law office occupied the 15th floor of a sleek glass building in downtown Phoenix, its reception area decorated with Southwestern art and staffed by a professionally cordial receptionist who directed us to a conference room. The others are already waiting, she informed us. Mr. Moretti will be with you shortly. Others? I exchanged a glance with Drew, wondering who else Vivian might have included in her final arrangements. We hadn't considered that we wouldn't be the only ones summoned. The conference room contained 4 people seated around a polished table. An elderly couple I didn't recognize, a middle-aged woman with Vivian's distinctive posture, and a young man approximately college-aged who bore a striking resemblance to Drew. Drew, the middle-aged woman rose, her expression a complicated mixture of emotions. You came. Aunt Catherine, Drew acknowledged with evident surprise. I didn't know you'd be here. Introductions followed rapidly. Catherine was Vivian's younger sister, estranged for nearly 20 years for reasons neither would discuss. The elderly couple were Vivian's former neighbors from Oak Ridge, Martin and Edith Carroll, who had apparently maintained correspondence after her relocation. The young man was Jason Hayes, a distant cousin on Drew's father's side whom Vivian had been financially supporting through college. Mom didn't tell me she was in touch with any of you, Drew admitted, settling into a chair beside me. That was Vivian's way, Catherine replied with a rueful smile. Compartmentalizing her relationships, keeping everyone in separate boxes. I only learned she was ill 6 months ago, when she finally reached out after all these years. Ill? Drew's face registered shock. I didn't know she was sick. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken by the arrival of Anthony Moretti, a dignified man in his 60s carrying a leather portfolio. After introductions and expressions of condolence, he addressed the group with practiced solemnity. Mrs. Hayes left explicit instructions for today's proceedings, he began, extracting several documents from his portfolio. Before I read the will itself, she asked that I deliver this letter to her son. He handed Drew an envelope sealed with wax, an oddly formal touch that seemed characteristic of Vivian's flair for the dramatic. Drew broke the seal carefully, unfolding several pages of his mother's distinctive handwriting. Would you like privacy to read this? Moretti offered. Drew glanced at the first few lines, then shook his head. No. Whatever she has to say, I'd prefer to hear it with everyone present. He began reading aloud, his voice steady despite the evident emotion behind the words. My dear Drew, if you're reading this, you've chosen to attend my funeral arrangements despite our estrangement. For that alone, I am grateful. The pancreatic cancer diagnosis came shortly after I moved to Arizona, cruelly ironic timing, as I'd just begun establishing a new life away from everything familiar. The prognosis was never good, but it did provide something invaluable: perspective. Facing mortality has a clarifying effect on one's priorities. In these final months, I've had ample time to reflect on my choices, particularly regarding you and your family. While I cannot undo the damage I've caused, I can at least offer an explanation, inadequate though it may be. After your father died, leaving us with debts I hadn't known existed and a financial future suddenly uncertain, I made a private vow that you would never experience such vulnerability. That you would always be protected, financially secure, able to control your circumstances rather than be controlled by them. What began as maternal protection gradually transformed into something unhealthy. I recognize that now. My fear of losing control, of watching you potentially repeat your father's mistakes, blinded me to the damage I was causing. I couldn't distinguish between protecting you and controlling you, between supporting your choices and dictating them. The Craftsman House represented my greatest failure as a mother. Instead of helping you establish independence, I saw an opportunity to ensure continued influence in your life. I manipulated, deceived, and justified my actions as necessary for your well-being, when they were actually serving my own need for control. I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. But I do want you to know that in my final months, as I worked with Catherine to arrange my affairs, I came to understand the gravity of my mistakes. Your wife was right. There is a profound difference between love and control, a distinction I failed to recognize until it was too late. The provisions in my will represent my attempt at amends. They cannot undo the past, but perhaps they can provide some measure of healing for the future. Whatever your feelings toward me, anger, resentment, indifference, please know that I am proud of the man you've become despite my interference. The strength you showed in standing up to me, in protecting your family from my manipulations, speaks to a character far stronger than I gave you credit for. Take care of your daughter. Teach her the lessons I failed to learn. And perhaps, someday, tell her that her grandmother, for all her grievous faults, did love her son, even if she expressed that love in all the wrong ways. With regret and enduring love, Mother. Silence filled the room as Drew finished reading, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. I placed my palm over his, offering silent support as he processed his mother's final words. She never told. Us how serious it was, Catherine said quietly. Even at the end, she insisted on maintaining control of the narrative. Moretti cleared his throat gently. If you're ready, I can proceed with the will itself. Drew nodded, carefully refolding his mother's letter. Please. The formal reading of the will contained several surprises. The majority of Vivian's substantial estate, the proceeds from selling her Oak Ridge home, investment accounts, and life insurance policies, was divided among various beneficiaries with careful precision. The Carrolls received a generous bequest to fund their retirement travels. Jason's education would be fully funded through graduate school if he chose to continue. Catherine inherited Vivian's personal belongings, jewelry, and art collection. Then came the provisions regarding Drew. To my son, Drew Richard Hayes, I leave my Arizona residence and its contents, with the stipulation that it be used as a vacation property for his family or sold at his discretion. Additionally, I established the Eliza Grace Hayes Education Trust, funded with $250,000, to be used exclusively for my granddaughter's future educational needs. Drew's expression registered shock at the mention of Eliza's name. Vivian had never met her granddaughter, had not even acknowledged her birth. Yet she had not only known her full name, but had established a trust specifically for her benefit. There is one final bequest, Moretti continued, turning to the last page. To Nora Hayes, my daughter-in-law, I leave the contents of safety deposit box number 422 at Phoenix National Bank, along with my sincere apology for actions that cannot be undone but should be acknowledged. Now it was my turn to be stunned. Vivian had never addressed me directly in her correspondence with Drew, had always referred to me in the third person, often with barely concealed disdain. A personal bequest, combined with an explicit apology, was perhaps the last thing I had expected. After the formal reading concluded and paperwork was signed, Catherine approached us with a warmth that contrasted sharply with our memories of Vivian. She was different at the end, she told Drew, her eyes gentle with understanding. Softer, more reflective. The illness stripped away many of her defenses. Why didn't she tell me she was sick? Drew asked, the question that had clearly been troubling him since Catherine's earlier revelation. Pride, mostly, Catherine replied, and perhaps fear that you might feel obligated to reconcile out of pity, rather than forgiveness. She wanted any healing between you to be genuine, not coerced by her circumstances. As we prepared to leave, Moretti provided the key to the safety deposit box, along with detailed instructions for accessing it. Mrs. Hayes was quite specific that you should review the contents privately, he explained. She considered it a matter between the two of you alone. We visited the bank immediately afterward, my curiosity about Vivian's mysterious bequest overriding exhaustion from the emotional day. The safety deposit box contained a single item, a leather-bound journal with a simple note attached to its cover. Nora. The truth, in my own words. Do with it what you will. V.H. The journal spanned the 3 years since our confrontation, beginning with Vivian's relocation to Arizona and continuing through her diagnosis, treatment, and gradual acceptance of her prognosis. What struck me most as I began reading was the radical honesty of her private reflections, so different from the carefully constructed narratives she had presented to the world. She wrote of her initial rage and resentment after losing control of the situation with the house, of her plans for revenge that gradually dissolved as her illness progressed, of her growing recognition, through therapy sessions she'd finally agreed to attend, that her controlling behaviors stemmed from profound anxiety and unresolved grief over her husband's death. Most surprisingly, she wrote about Eliza, the granddaughter she would never meet. She had apparently followed our lives from a distance, through mutual acquaintances and occasional social media glimpses. She described her complex feelings upon seeing photos of Eliza, the regret that her own actions had severed her connection to this new generation of her family. The final entries, written in an increasingly shaky hand as her illness progressed, contained a vulnerability I would never have associated with the Vivian we had known. I wonder if there is a special kind of grief for relationships destroyed by one's own hand. The finality of this diagnosis forces me to acknowledge that I will never have the opportunity to meet my granddaughter, to attempt amends with my son and his wife, to demonstrate that perhaps I could have learned, however belatedly, to love without controlling. As I closed the journal, I found Drew watching me from across our hotel room, his expression questioning. She was trying to understand herself, I explained, passing him the journal. To make sense of her actions. It doesn't excuse anything, but it does explain a lot. Later that night, as we lay in the darkness of our hotel room, Drew spoke the question that had been hovering unspoken between us. What do we do with all this? Her apologies, her explanations, her bequests? I considered carefully before answering. We accept the apology without necessarily granting forgiveness. We use the education fund for Eliza because it benefits her future. And we recognize that people can be both harmful, manipulative, and regretful, controlling, and ultimately, human. Drew was quiet for a long moment. I think I need to tell Eliza about her someday. Not now, but when she's old enough to understand. The full story, both the damage Vivian caused and her eventual recognition of that damage. There are important lessons there. About boundaries. I agreed. About the difference between love and control. About how even people who hurt us deeply can sometimes, at the very end, attempt to make amends in the only ways left to them. As we flew home the following day, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected turns our journey had taken, from the manipulated house purchase to Vivian's posthumous attempt at reconciliation. The property deed that had once been weaponized against us had ultimately led to a different kind of inheritance, hard-won wisdom about family dynamics, boundaries, and the complexity of human relationships. The Craftsman house awaited our return, no longer haunted by Vivian's manipulations, but transformed into the secure family home we had fought to create. And though the shadows of past conflicts would never completely disappear, they had been diminished by the light of understanding. Not enough for complete forgiveness, perhaps, but sufficient for a kind of peace neither of us had anticipated. "Mom, where did this house come from?" Eliza's question caught me off guard as we drove, home from her 5th birthday party at the lake cabin. She gazed out the window at our Craftsman home, her expression thoughtful beyond her years as Drew pulled into the driveway. "What do you mean, sweetie?" I asked, unbuckling my seatbelt to turn and face her properly. "You know this is our house. You've lived here your whole life." "But before that," she persisted, her hazel eyes, so like Drew's, serious and inquiring. "Where was it before we lived in it?" Drew and I exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between us. We'd agreed to be honest with Eliza about her grandmother when the time came, but had expected that conversation to be years in the future. "Another family lived here," Drew explained, keeping his answer simple. "Then they moved, and we bought it to be our home." Eliza seemed to consider this as we unloaded the car, carrying in overnight bags and the remaining birthday cake. The matter appeared settled until bedtime, when she returned to the topic with the tenacity typical of her curious nature. "Daddy, why do you and Mommy check our house papers so much?" she asked, as Drew tucked her into bed beneath the night sky ceiling he'd painted years ago. The constellations glowed softly in the dark, created with special paint that absorbed daylight and released it as a gentle luminescence at night. "What house papers do you mean?" Drew asked, settling onto the edge of her bed. "The ones in the fireproof box," she replied matter-of-factly. "With all the stamps and fancy writing. You and Mommy look at them every year on my birthday." She wasn't wrong. Each year on Eliza's birthday after the celebrations ended, Drew and I had established a private tradition of reviewing our property documents, the original deed, the transfer paperwork from Vivian, the updated will protecting Eliza's inheritance. It was our way of honoring the journey that had brought us here, of reminding ourselves of the lessons learned through conflict and resolution. Those are important papers that make sure our home stays safe for our family, Drew explained, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes adults need to check important papers to make sure everything is still okay. Eliza yawned, momentarily distracted by fatigue, and Drew seized the opportunity to redirect the conversation to her birthday adventures at the lake. Soon she was asleep, but her questions lingered in our minds as we settled in the living room with cups of tea. "She's noticing things," I observed, "making connections." Drew nodded, his expression pensive. "She's going to have more questions. About the house, about my mother, about why she doesn't have a grandmother on my side when her friends all seem to have 2 sets of grandparents. So what do we tell her? And when?" The question had no simple answer. We'd established a family culture of honesty and open communication, but explaining Vivian's manipulations and our subsequent conflict required nuance beyond a 5-year-old's understanding. "Maybe we start with the basic framework," Drew suggested. "Not all the details, but enough that she understands our family story includes challenges we overcame together." I considered this approach. A foundation she can build on as she gets older and can understand more complex dynamics. Our opportunity came sooner than expected. The following weekend, as spring rain kept us indoors, Eliza discovered an old photo that had slipped behind a bookshelf. A formal portrait of Vivian from before our estrangement, elegantly dressed and impeccably composed. "Who's this lady?" she asked, bringing the photo to where I sat sorting through design samples for a client project. I took the photograph, surprised it had survived our numerous purges of Vivian-related items over the years. "This is your grandmother, Vivian, Daddy's mother." Eliza studied the image with intense focus. "She looks fancy. Where is she now?" "She died before you had a chance to meet her," I explained gently. "She lived far away in Arizona." "Was she nice?" The seemingly simple question presented an immediate dilemma. I called for Drew, who joined us from his home office, immediately understanding the situation as he saw the photograph in my hand. "Your grandmother Vivian was complicated," Drew told Eliza, choosing honesty over simplification. "She loved me very much, but she didn't always show that love in healthy ways." Eliza climbed onto the couch between us, sensing an important conversation. "Like when Tyler at school says he pushes people because he likes them, but Miss Garcia says that's not how we show we like someone?" Drew smiled at her unexpected insight. "Something like that, yes. Your grandmother thought she was protecting me by trying to control the choices I made, even adult choices, like which house to buy or how to set up our family." "That's silly," Eliza declared with 5-year-old certainty. "Grown-ups make their own choices." "Yes, they should," I agreed. "But sometimes people who love us very much get confused and think that making choices for us is the same as taking care of us." "Is that why she's not in any of our family pictures?" Eliza asked, making another perceptive connection. Drew took a deep breath. "Yes. Before you were born, your grandmother and I had a big disagreement about this house. She wanted to make decisions about it that weren't hers to make, and that caused a lot of problems for Mommy and me." Eliza considered this information solemnly. "Was it a big fight? With yelling?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But more importantly, it was about setting boundaries, explaining to her that while we appreciated her help, we needed to make our own decisions about our lives and our home. Like when you tell me, I can decorate my own room however I want, but I can't draw on the hallway walls because those are family spaces?" Drew laughed softly at her comparison. "That's actually a very good example. Your grandmother had trouble understanding which walls were hers to decorate, so to speak." Eliza examined the photograph again. "She looks like she has a stern voice, like Principal Winters when someone's in trouble. She could be stern, Drew acknowledged, but she could also be generous and protective. People are complicated that way. They can be both helpful and difficult, kind and controlling. Is that why you check the house papers? To make sure she can't take over the decorating anymore? The insight was so unexpectedly accurate that Drew and I exchanged startled glances before he responded. In a way, yes. Those papers help remind us that this is our family home, and we get to decide how things work here. Satisfied with this explanation, Eliza soon lost interest in the photograph and the conversation, returning to the elaborate block city she'd been constructing in the corner of the living room. But the discussion marked a turning point in our family narrative, the beginning of Eliza's integration into the full story of her heritage, including both the conflicts and the resolutions. In the years that followed, we shared more details, appropriate to her growing maturity. When she was 7, we explained how the inheritance clause in the original deed had protected our ownership. At 9, she learned about Vivian's manipulations regarding the tax delinquency and repairs. By 12, she understood the legal maneuvers, the confrontation, and ultimately, Vivian's posthumous attempts at amends. Rather than damaging her sense of family security, these honest discussions seemed to strengthen Eliza's understanding of healthy relationships. She developed a remarkably nuanced perspective on boundaries, frequently surprising us with her insight into complex interpersonal dynamics among her friends and their families. Madison's grandma is doing the Vivian thing again, she reported matter-of-factly after returning from a friend's house at 13. Telling Madison's parents they're raising her wrong and threatening to change her will if they don't send her to the private school she chose. The way our family story had become a reference point for understanding unhealthy control dynamics was both surprising and gratifying, a testament to the power of honest communication about difficult subjects. When Eliza turned 16, we faced a decision about Vivian's Arizona house, which we had maintained as a rental property since inheriting it. The education trust had grown substantially, ensuring Eliza's college expenses would be fully covered regardless of which institution she chose. The rental income from the Arizona property had been set aside in a separate account, untouched over the years as we deliberated its appropriate use. "I've been thinking," Drew said one evening as we reviewed our annual financial planning, "about my mother's house in Phoenix." "What about it?" I asked, setting aside the budget spreadsheet we'd been discussing. "I think it's time to sell it and do something meaningful with the proceeds, something that acknowledges both the harm she caused and her attempts to make amends." The idea resonated with me immediately. A foundation of some kind? Something related to family counseling or financial literacy? "I was thinking about housing security, actually," Drew replied. "A program that helps families in danger of losing their homes due to financial manipulation or predatory lending. Resources, legal support, emergency funds." The concept felt right, a transformation of Vivian's legacy from control to support, from manipulation to protection. We presented the idea to Eliza over dinner, wanting her input on a decision that involved her inheritance as well. "I think Grandmother Vivian would have hated it," she said bluntly after considering the proposal, "but also recognized it was the right thing to do. From what you've told me about her journal, she was starting to understand the damage her control caused." Her use of Grandmother Vivian, formal, acknowledging the relationship without falsely personalizing it, reflected the balanced perspective we'd tried to foster. Eliza had never met Vivian, but she had developed a complex understanding of the woman whose actions had so profoundly shaped our family's journey. 6 months later, we officially established the Safe Foundations Initiative, using the proceeds from selling Vivian's Arizona house to provide legal assistance, financial counseling, and emergency support to families facing housing insecurity due to manipulation or fraud. Drew joined the board of directors, bringing his architectural expertise to evaluations of property conditions and repair estimates. turning his professional skills toward protecting others from the very techniques his mother had employed against us. On the day the initiative launched, as we returned home from the official ceremony, Eliza paused on our porch, looking up at the Craftsman house with new appreciation. It's kind of amazing, she reflected, how something that started so negatively ended up helping other people. Like the house itself had a character arc. Drew laughed at her literary analysis. I suppose it did, from battlefield to sanctuary, to catalyst for change. Inside, we gathered around the fireplace in the living room that had witnessed so much of our family's story. Vivian's initial manipulations, our determined resistance, our eventual triumph, and now, the transformation of that conflict into something constructive. You know, I said, watching the flames dance in the hearth we'd redesigned together years ago. We never did solve the mystery of how that inheritance clause ended up in our original deed. The one that specified the right of first refusal and ultimately gave us leverage against Vivian's scheme. Drew nodded thoughtfully. I've always wondered about that. It wasn't standard language for residential property transfers in our area. Bernard certainly didn't add it. It worked against his client's interests, and the previous owners had no reason to include such specific protection. Maybe it was just luck, Eliza suggested, curled up with her latest novel in the window. Seat we'd built during one of our many personalized renovations. Random legal boilerplate that happened to be exactly what you needed. Maybe, I agreed, though the coincidence had always seemed too perfect to be entirely random. Or maybe someone was looking out for us. Drew's expression softened as he glanced toward the small photograph of his father now displayed on our mantel, a conciliatory gesture following our discovery of the lake cabin and our gradual integration of Richard Hayes's memory into our family narrative. Dad was friends with a real estate attorney, he said quietly. They played golf together every Thursday for years. I always wondered if he might have learned something from those conversations, about protecting assets, about inheritance clauses, about ensuring that property transfers included safeguards. The possibility created a satisfying symmetry that Richard Hayes, who had failed to protect his own family's financial security during his lifetime, might have inadvertently provided the very protection Drew needed years after his death. That the father's relationship with property and legacy had come full circle through the son's struggle and triumph. I like that theory, Eliza declared, closing her book. It makes the whole story feel complete, like everything happened for a reason. As night fell, we found ourselves on the back porch, gazing up at stars emerging in the darkening sky. The same stars Drew had faithfully reproduced on Eliza's nursery ceiling all those years ago. The Craftsman house stood solid behind us, no longer defined by the conflict over its ownership, but by the lives we'd built within its walls. You know, Drew said softly, in all the upheaval with my mother, I sometimes forget to appreciate what we actually accomplished. We didn't just keep the house, we created a home, a real one. I leaned against him, watching Eliza photograph the evening sky with her camera. Her latest passion, documenting the world as she saw it. The deed was just paper. The property was just land and materials. The home was what we built together, choice by choice, day by day. Even through the conflicts, Drew added. Maybe especially through the conflicts. They clarified what really mattered to us. The inheritance that truly mattered wasn't the physical structure, the legal documents, or even the financial assets, but the values we'd developed through adversity, the commitment to honest communication, the recognition of healthy boundaries, the understanding that true love empowers rather than controls. As Eliza rejoined us, showing off her latest photographs with enthusiastic commentary about lighting and composition, I reflected on how our property battle had ultimately given her something more valuable than a house. It had given her a story of resilience, a model of partnership, and a clear-eyed understanding of both the complexity of family relationships and the possibility of transformation. The deed that had once been weaponized against us had become, in the end, not just a legal document, but a legacy of lessons learned and wisdom earned. A foundation stronger than concrete, more lasting than timber, more valuable than any property could ever be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.